Not Chapter 1. The question you will not escape. There is a moment, and you may have felt it, when the world you thought you understood suddenly goes very quiet. Not silent in a peaceful way, silent in the way that happens when something true arrives and you are not ready for it. When a word lands in your chest before your mind has had time to process it. When you see something that cannot be unseen, and you know, even as you are seeing it, that whatever comes next will be different from what came before. This is a story about that moment. Not just one person's moment, not just one culture's story, not just one tradition's teaching. This is a story about a moment that belongs to every human being who has ever drawn breath in every century, in every corner of this world. And a moment that is either the most terrifying thing that can happen to you or the most liberating, depending entirely on what you do with it. It begins at a palace gate just before dawn. A year is roughly 500 years before the Common Era. The place is Kapilavatthu, a small kingdom in what is now the southern foothills of Nepal, pressed against the base of the Himalayan range. If you have ever been in that region at that hour, or anywhere in the subtropics near the mountains at that hour, you know what the air feels like. It is cool without being cold. It carries moisture and something green, something alive. It smells of damp earth and wood smoke from the cooking fires that the servants have already lit in the palace kitchens, because the work of a palace never really stops, and birds are beginning their first uncertain calls, not singing yet, just testing, just announcing that another night has passed and they are still here. The sky is the particular shade of blue that exists only in that narrow band between night and morning. Not dark, not light, not yet decided. The kind of blue that makes you feel, if you stop and look at it, that the world is holding something in. That something is about to change. A young man stands at the edge of the palace grounds. He is 29 years old. He has been, by any reasonable standard, one of the luckiest human beings who ever lived. Not just wealthy, though he has been that in the way that only the children of kings can be wealthy, surrounded by things of beauty from before he could walk. Not just loved, though he has been that too, loved by parents and servants and all the faces that populated his careful, curated world. He has been sheltered, protected, kept. His name is Siddhartha, and he is about to have his world torn open. He has lived all his life inside walls, beautiful walls, walls lined with flowering trees, jasmine and champak and the night-blooming flowers that perfume the dark air so heavily they almost make you dizzy. Walls that enclosed music and servants and the soft conversation of people whose job it was to make sure nothing unpleasant ever intruded on the prince's awareness. Walls that kept out old age, that kept out sickness, that kept out death. His father, King Suddhodana, built this world deliberately, carefully, with the fierce, protective love of a man who had received a prophecy he could not afford to ignore, and who had chosen, out of that love, not to gamble everything on defying it. The story is well known in the tradition. When Siddhartha was born, a sage came down from the mountains. His name was Asita, an old man, a man of great spiritual power, and whose face in the texts is described as wearing the peculiar combination of joy and grief that belongs to someone who sees very far. He looked at the infant in the way that some people look at things, not the way ordinary people look, glancing and moving on, but the way a person looks who is actually seeing, taking in the whole truth of what is in front of them. And the sage wept. Then he explained to the frightened king and queen what he had seen. This child, he said, has the marks, the 32 marks of a great being. And a great being, he said, has 2 possible destinies. If he remains in the world, if he encounters the world as it truly is, he will renounce everything he knows and become the greatest spiritual teacher the human race has ever produced. A Sama Sambuddha, a fully and perfectly awakened one, a Buddha. But if he can be kept from seeing the world as it truly is, If he can be protected from the four sights, he will become the greatest king the world has ever seen. Then King Suddhodana loved his son, and King Suddhodana was a man of the world, a ruler, a pragmatist, a person who understood the value of power and comfort and dynasty. He chose the king. He built the walls higher. He hired only the young and healthy to serve in the palace. He banned the elderly from the grounds. He ensured that no one suffering from illness came within the prince's sight. He kept death itself at a distance, as if by sheer force of a father's will he could keep the third divine messenger from ever finding his son's address. And for 29 years the walls held. 29 years. Think about that. Think about what it means to have been kept for nearly 3 decades from the most basic and unavoidable truths of human existence. Not because anyone wanted to harm you, but because someone loved you too much. Wrong direction. Because protection, taken to its extreme, becomes its own kind of cage. Siddhartha grew up inside that cage. He married a woman named Yasodhara, who the texts describe as brilliant and kind. He had a son, Rahula, a name that means fetter, which tells you something about what part of Siddhartha already knew even then, that something was not right. And he had music and dancing and good food and all the pleasures that a body can want. He had, in other words, everything except the one thing that no amount of palace walls can permanently keep out: reality. You know what it is like to live inside those walls. I am not speaking metaphorically now, or not only metaphorically. You know what it is to curate your world so that certain truths don't quite reach you. No. You know what it is to scroll past the difficult headline, to see the number in the news story, the 1,000 dead, the 10,000 displaced, and to feel something briefly and then to scroll on, because the alternative is to stop and let it fully in, and you have things to do today. And the truth, if you let it all the way through, would be too heavy to carry alongside everything else you're already carrying. You know what it is to not visit the relative in the hospital quite as often as you know you should, to find reasons, good reasons, real reasons, why today isn't convenient, why next week would be better, why they seem to be doing fine anyway and probably don't need the visit as much as you'd been worrying. You know what it is to look away from the man on the corner, not because you are cruel, you are not cruel, but because something in you knows that looking fully at him, letting him be fully real to you in his specific suffering and specific personhood would cost you something, not would require something. And you are not sure on this Tuesday with this inbox and these obligations that you have that something to spend. This is not a moral failure. This is the condition of being human in a world that contains more suffering than any one human heart can fully hold at any given moment. King Suddhodana's instinct was not wrong. It was just taken too far, held too long, applied with too much control. The walls he built for his son were more elaborate versions of the walls we all maintain in one way or another to make the ordinary business of living possible. The Buddha had a word for this. Actually, he had 2 words, one for the thing itself and one for its opposite, pamada. That is the word for heedlessness, for the state of living with the walls up, with the messengers ignored, with the truth of impermanence held at a careful distance so that you can get through your day. Pamada is not stupidity, it is not cruelty. It is, in many ways, entirely understandable, almost inevitable, given the nature of the mind and the relentlessness of modern distraction. But it is, the Buddha said with characteristic directness, the road, not one of several roads, the road. The road that leads, if followed long enough, to the kind of suffering that does not resolve with time, and appamada. That is the opposite, diligence, heedfulness, the quality of being genuinely, fully, uncomfortably present with what is real, a quality that does not look away when the messenger arrives, the quality that lets in what needs to be let in, even when letting it in is difficult, the Buddha said. And this is one of the most quoted lines in all of Pali literature, appearing in the Dhammapada and in numerous other places. Appamado amarapadam, pamado makunopadam. Diligence is the path of the deathless. Heedlessness is the path of death. He was not speaking about physical death. He was speaking about something more fundamental than that. The person who lives in appamada, who lives with the eyes open, who has let the messengers in, and who has allowed the truth of mortality to actually reorganize their priorities and their daily choices. That person, even in a mortal body, is living in a way that does not die with the body. The quality of awareness they have cultivated, the karma of their diligence, the flame of their practice, these carry forward. The person who lives in pamada, who has kept the walls up, who has said later, who has scrolled past the messengers every time they appeared, that person, even while breathing, is already absent from the most important room in their own life. But on this particular morning that stands at the hinge of what would become the greatest spiritual tradition in human history, something shifted. Siddhartha woke up restless. He had been restless before, but differently. The restlessness of a person who has too much comfort and suspects there is something missing, but cannot name it because they have never encountered the thing that names itself by its absence. Now the restlessness had a different quality, a more directed quality, as if his whole body was leaning towards something just outside the gate. He went to find Channa. Channa was his charioteer, a faithful man who had served the prince since they were both young, a man who knew Siddhartha's face so well that he could read its moods from across a courtyard, and Channa knew, because he was not blind, and because he moved through the world outside the palace walls every day, because he had seen what King Suddhodana had tried so hard to prevent his son from seeing. Channa knew that this morning was different. Siddhartha said, "I want to see the city. Take me out." And Channa, loyal as he was, loyal first to the prince perhaps, and only second to the king's careful arrangement of the world, could not refuse. He prepared the chariot. He led the horses through the gate, and everything that came next, every teaching the Buddha would ever give, every word that has come down to us across 2.5 millennia, every monastery built on every mountain, every meditation hall in every city, every moment of genuine human liberation that has ever been sparked by the Dhamma, every monk who ever wore the saffron robe, every person who ever sat in silence and found in that silence something more real than the noise they'd been living in. All of it, every single thread of it, traces back to what happened in the next few hours on the road outside that palace gate. There is a question, the Buddha would later say, that every human being will eventually be asked. Not by a teacher, not by a philosopher, not by a parent or a priest or a loved one. It will be asked by life itself. It will be asked in the form of what happens to you, what you see, what you lose, what changes in your body and in the bodies of the people you love. It will be asked quietly at first in small ways that are easy to ignore. Then, if it has been ignored long enough, it will ask itself more loudly. And when that moment comes, when the question arrives in a form that can no longer be deflected or deferred, the only answer that will matter is the one already written in how you have lived, not the answer you give in words, the answer that is visible in the choices you made when the messenger first appeared, and you still had time to choose. By the time this story is over, by the time you have traveled with us through all 13 chapters of this journey, on through the Devadūta Sutta and the court of King Yama and the testimonies of people who heeded the messengers and people who did not, and through hell realms and mustard seeds and men who carried garlands of fingers and emperors who wept in fields of consequence. By then you will understand exactly what that question is, not as information, as something felt, and as something that has moved in you. And you may find, if you have been honest with yourself along the way, that you have already been answering it every day in the small choices of your ordinary life, whether you knew it or not. For now, the chariot moves through the gate, the wheels creak against the stone. The city opens up ahead, the real city, the city that exists outside the palace walls, the city where people age and get sick and die and carry their dead through the streets and sit by the road unable to walk without assistance. Channa holds the reins with both hands. Siddhartha leans forward in the chariot, his eyes wide and alive, drinking in everything he has never been permitted to see. And then, on the side of the road, he sees something that stops his breath, something so ordinary that it should not, by any reasonable standard, be able to stop a young man's breath, something that you have seen 100 times and looked away from 100 times and probably looked away from again just yesterday. An old man. On chapter 2, the first time he saw an old man. If you were listening carefully at the end of the last part of our journey, you felt something shift, something in the air, in the quality of attention. The moment before Siddhartha sees the old man is one of those moments, and you know them from your own life, when you can feel that something is about to happen, when the ordinary texture of things becomes somehow more textured, more present, more consequential. He sees the old man and his world changes. But before we follow Siddhartha into that change, before we sit with him in the chariot and watch what this sight does to him, I want to take a moment and ask you something. When was the last time you really saw an old person, not glanced at, not noticed and moved past, not acknowledged with the automatic social grace that allows us to share space with people without actually making contact? I mean saw. The way Siddhartha is about to see. When did you last let an old person be fully real to you? Their specific oldness, the specific way their body has changed, the specific things they can no longer do that they once could do, a specific relationship between who they are now and who they must have been before. Now, when did you last let that reality travel all the way from your eyes to your heart without stopping at the glass wall of comfortable distance that most of us keep between ourselves and certain truths? It is a harder question than it sounds, because the glass wall is very good at what it does. We have had a lot of practice installing it. The thing about the first sight is not that it was horrifying. That is what people expect when they hear this story. They imagine Siddhartha recoiling from some scene of gore or violence or catastrophe. They imagine him seeing something extraordinary, something no one could be expected to take in stride. But the account that has come down to us, preserved in the Buddha-Karita, the poetic biography written by the extraordinary monk poet Ashvaghosha sometime in the 1st or 2nd century of the Common Era, and echoed and confirmed in various places in the Pali canon. The account describes something so undramatic, so ordinary, that it is almost more startling than a dramatic scene would have been. It was just an old man, sitting by the side of the road, not performing his oldness, not asking for attention or sympathy, just sitting there the way very old people sometimes sit, not quite resting, not quite doing anything, occupying space with the particular quality of someone who has stopped trying to accomplish things and is simply being present in the world with whatever energy remains. Ashvaghosha describes him with the specificity of a painter. His hair had gone white, not elegantly silver, but the flat, thin white of hair that has lost its pigment and its body. His back had curved forward and inward, as if the years had been pressing on his shoulders with steadily increasing weight, and eventually he had simply accommodated the pressure. His hands, Ashvaghosha notices, trembled slightly even at rest, a fine tremor that is not the trembling of cold or fear, but the trembling of a nervous system that has been running for a very long time and is beginning to show the wear. His skin hung from his bones, not loosely, not grotesquely, but in the specific way that skin hangs when the underlying tissue has reduced, when the padding of youth and middle age has slowly diminished and left the surface with a little more area than the structure below it requires. His teeth, where they were visible, were mostly gone, and the shape of his face had changed accordingly. The jaw slightly sunken, the lips a different shape than they would have been 40 years ago. He was leaning on a staff, not holding it the way you or I might hold an umbrella or a walking stick, casually, at an angle, the weight on our hip. He was leaning on it the way a building leans on its foundation, with total, unself-conscious, non-negotiable dependence. Because without the staff he would fall. This was not a choice he had made. It was the simple reality of his body, accepted without drama, because it had been accepted so long ago that there was no drama left in it. He was not in agony. He was not suffering in any visible way. He was not crying or asking for help or doing anything that would signal to the world that something was wrong. He was just old, visibly, completely, irreversibly old, and moving when he moved with the careful deliberateness of someone for whom movement requires planning, for whom the gap between intention and action has lengthened over the years until it is now a chasm that must be crossed with patience every single time. Siddhartha looked at this man, and this is the detail that Ashvaghosha preserves and that I think is the most important detail in the entire account. Siddhartha did not look away. He leaned forward in the chariot, not flinching backward, forward, as if being pulled toward something that his body understood before his mind did. There was no disgust in his gaze, no pity in the condescending sense, no comfortable distance of the kind we usually maintain between ourselves and the physical realities of aging. There was something much more uncomfortable than disgust or pity. There was recognition, not the recognition of having seen this man before, the recognition of seeing for the first time something that was already true about himself. You know this feeling. I know you know it. And because there is no adult alive who has not felt some version of it at some point. You may have felt it at a family gathering, Thanksgiving, a wedding, a funeral, at a birthday party, where you saw someone you have known your whole life and were suddenly struck by how much they had changed. Not gradually, in the way you know they have been changing. You've been watching that gradually, but suddenly, in the way that only happens when some combination of light and angle and your own state of mind removes the filter of familiarity and lets you see them freshly. Your father, who used to carry you on his shoulders, now moves a little carefully when he stands up from a chair. Your grandmother, whose hands you remember as capable and warm, now has hands that shake slightly when she pours the tea. Your old teacher, the one who seemed so vital and unstoppable when you were in their class, has silver in their hair now and pauses sometimes mid-sentence in a way they didn't used to, searching for a word that used to come instantly. You see this. You feel something. Something moves in you. Some combination of love and grief and something more unsettling than either. Some recognition that makes you want to look away. And most of the time you look away. You change the subject. You fill the silence with something bright and chatty. You let the moment pass because the alternative, staying in it, letting it be fully what it is, feels like more than you have available for this particular Tuesday. Siddhartha didn't look away. He asked Channa, "What is wrong with that man?" And the question itself is worth sitting with. What is wrong with that man? Because the assumption embedded in the question is that something has gone wrong, that the man's condition is aberrant, exceptional, the result of some particular misfortune that has befallen him. But that does not by nature befall everyone. This is not a foolish assumption. This is what 29 years inside palace walls, surrounded by only the young and healthy, produces. A mind that has never had to integrate the ordinary facts of bodily decay and so encounters them as abnormalities rather than as the natural conclusion of a process that is already underway in every living body. Channa paused before he answered. He must have known the particular way that loyal servants know things, that instinctive awareness of how much is riding on what you say next, that there was no going back from whatever he said. He could have deflected. He could have said something generic and soothing and moved the horses forward and hoped the moment would pass. Many people in his position would have, but Channa told the truth. He said, "My lord, that is an old man. He is old because he has lived a long time, and this is what living a long time does to a body. And old age, my lord, old age is not his particular misfortune. It comes to all of us. It will come to your servants. It will come to your friends. It will come to the people you love. It will come to your father, and it will come to you. Every single one of us, without a single exception, is walking in the direction of what you are looking at right now. Siddhartha sat in the chariot and did not speak. What is the sound of a worldview cracking? Not breaking, cracking. The hairline fracture that, once it appears, cannot be unfound. The thing that changes the integrity of the structure without visibly changing its shape. It sounds, I think, like silence. And the particular silence of a person who has just received information that their entire existing framework is inadequate to process. Who has heard something true and cannot, yet, do anything with it except hold it, very still. And while everything else rearranges itself around it. This is the Pali word jara landing for the first time in a mind that was not prepared to receive it. Jara, old age. And I want to take a moment with this word because it carries dimensions that the English phrase old age does not quite capture. Jara is not primarily about gray hair or wrinkles or any of the visible, surface-level markers of aging that our culture simultaneously dreads and monetizes. Jara is a deeper process. It is the progressive inability of living systems to maintain themselves against the forces of entropy. No, it is the slow but mathematically certain accumulation of damage in biological systems that cannot be fully repaired. The errors that compound, the structures that degrade, the processes that slow and eventually stop. It is already happening in you. Not as a future event, as a present fact. Consider, by the time most people finish formal education and enter their mid-20s, the brain's processing speed, the raw speed at which neural signals travel and synaptic connections activate, has already peaked and begun its very slow decline. The cardiovascular system, now optimized for the athletic demands of a young body, begins the long process of gradually reducing its maximum capacity. The immune system, which in childhood mounted aggressive and efficient responses to pathogens, begins to show its first subtle signs of slower reaction times and reduced flexibility. None of this is visible in the mirror at 25. None of it is felt in any significant way. But it is happening. Jara has already begun. Not at 80, not at 60, not even at 40. Now, in the body you are inhabiting in this moment as you listen to these words. By the time you reach your 40s, the changes become somewhat more visible. Muscle mass begins to decline more noticeably without sustained effort to maintain it. And bone density, which was being accumulated through your 20s and 30s like money in a savings account, begins to be spent rather than saved. The lenses of the eyes, which were perfectly flexible in youth, begin to stiffen very slowly. Which is why most people find themselves holding books at arm's length for the first time in their early 40s. The circadian rhythms shift, sleep patterns change, and recovery from exertion takes measurably longer. By the time you reach what the culture calls older age, and there is no agreed-upon threshold, which is itself revealing, the changes have become comprehensive. Every major system in the body is running at a reduced capacity compared to its peak. Not broken, not failed, reduced. And then if you live long enough, you arrive at what Siddhartha is looking at on the side of the road. The end stage of a process that began before you could walk. The logical conclusion of a trajectory that you have been on your entire life. The Buddha was very deliberate about wanting his students to understand this, not as a distant possibility, but as a present reality. This is why Jara is the first of the three divine messengers, not sickness, which can arrive without warning and seems more random, not death, which seems more final and absolute. Old age, because old age is happening right now in this body, in this moment, and because acknowledging that, really acknowledging it, not as abstract information, but as a felt truth, is the beginning of the entire path. The poet Ashvaghosha tells us something beautiful and specific about what happened that night after Siddhartha returned to the palace. The servants lit the lamps. The musicians took their places. The food was brought, exquisitely prepared, arranged with the care and artistry that had always characterized the palace kitchens. The entertainers performed. dancers whose bodies were young and fluid, and capable of things that young bodies can do. And Siddhartha sat in the middle of all of it, perfectly still, and could not make any of it mean what it had always meant before. He looked at the dancers and saw, for the first time, bodies that were moving beautifully now, and that would one day move the way the old man's body moved, slowly, carefully, with effort where there was now ease. He looked at the musicians and heard, for the first time, a music that was temporary, played by fingers that would one day shake too much to hold an instrument, by voices that would one day fail. He looked at the food laid out before him and thought, this body I am feeding will one day be unable to feed itself, will need to be fed by others, the way the old man needed to lean on his staff. He had seen Jara, and now he could not unsee it. It had entered his awareness like a lens that, once fitted, cannot be removed. Everything he looked at was now seen through it, and what he saw everywhere was impermanence, was process, none. Was the present moment already in motion toward its conclusion? This is the gift of the first divine messenger properly received. Not despair, not paralysis, not the morbid obsession with decay that sometimes masquerades as wisdom. A gift is a different kind of seeing. The capacity to perceive the preciousness of what is present precisely because of its impermanence. The dancer is more beautiful, not less, when you see that the dance is finite. The music is more real, not less, when you hear that it will stop. The body you are in is more worthy of care and attention and wise use, not less, not when you acknowledge that it will not always be available to you in its current form. Siddhartha was not yet the Buddha, and he would not attain the full flower of enlightenment for another 6 years. 6 years of intense and sometimes brutal spiritual searching, of leaving the palace and wandering, of sitting with teachers and going beyond what they could teach, of near death through extreme asceticism and the gradual understanding that a different approach was needed. He had a long road ahead of him, but this night, in the palace, surrounded by music and dancers and the smell of flowers, with the old man still present in his mind's eye, something had begun. Some deep interior process had been initiated that would not stop until it arrived at its conclusion. The first divine messenger had done its work, and the question it left behind, the question that would drive Siddhartha out of the palace and into the forest and ultimately to the ground beneath a Bodhi tree, is the same question it is offering you right now. If this is what awaits, if this is the nature of this body, this life, this world, then what matters? What is worth doing? What is worth spending the limited, irreplaceable time of a human life on? What the middle of all this impermanence, all this inevitable diminishment, all this beautiful, fleeting aliveness? What could possibly be worth giving your whole life to? That question, once it takes root in you, does not let go, and it takes root differently in different people. For some, it arrives in childhood, at the death of a grandparent or a pet, the first direct encounter with the fact that things end. For some, it arrives in midlife, the quiet of a sleepless night when the future suddenly seems shorter than it used to. For some, it arrives with a diagnosis, their own or someone they love. For some, it arrives very late and there is still time to act on it, and they do. You know when it arrived for you. Maybe it is arriving right now in this moment in the form of this story and these words, in the quiet space you have created to listen. The first messenger arrived for Siddhartha on a road outside Kapilavatthu. It arrived in the form of a man with white hair and trembling hands, and a staff that he leaned on with his whole weight. It arrived with the simple, devastating truth that Channa spoke. This comes to all. And Siddhartha, for the first time in 29 years, let it in. The chariot is waiting again. Channa is holding the reins. Siddhartha has asked to go out a second time. He has seen old age, and he is not done looking. Chapter 3. The sick man, the corpse, and the wanderer. You are back in the chariot now, back on the road outside the palace walls. But something has changed about the road itself, or rather, something has changed about the eyes looking at it. You cannot unsee what you saw last time. The world has acquired a new transparency, as if someone has reached into the dense material of the ordinary and made it thinner, more permeable, less able to hold the comfortable opacity it used to maintain. You look at the buildings along the road and see them differently. Not their facades, not their presented surfaces, but something behind the surfaces. The people you pass look different too. Not because they have changed, because you have. Channa holds the reins with the same steady hands. Siddhartha sits behind him. The city opens up around the chariot, and the city is doing what cities always do, producing the dense, layered, overlapping texture of human life going about its business. Voices from market stalls, the sound of tools against stone or wood somewhere nearby. A child's laugh, the particular smell of a city in the morning, before the heat of the day has had time to intensify it. And then Siddhartha sees the second sight, a man lying by the road, not sleeping. The distinction is immediately clear, even before the mind has had time to analyze it. Something about the quality of the stillness is wrong. Sleeping people have a particular kind of stillness, the relaxed, temporary stillness of a body that is resting between activities. This man's stillness is different. It is the stillness of a body that is working as hard as it possibly can just to remain alive. He is lying in his own filth. This is the detail the Buddha includes in the Devadūta Sutta, and it is included deliberately, not for shock value, but because it is the detail that most precisely captures what severe illness does. It strips away the ordinary management of a body, the constant, visible work that health allows us to perform automatically, without thinking about it. When that work becomes impossible, the body becomes something different. Something that requires help with the most basic things. Something that, without help, cannot maintain even the minimum dignities that we usually take entirely for granted. The man's body is distorted by what is happening inside it. Swollen in some places, sunken in others. His skin has taken on a color that skin should not be. His breathing is audible from the chariot, a wet, labored sound. Each exhale carrying a slight rattle that suggests fluid where there should not be fluid. Resistance where there should be ease. Other people are moving around him on the road, giving him a wide berth, the way people give wide berths to things that remind them of their own fragility. Siddhartha looks at this man. He looks for a long time, the same way he looked at the old man, not flinching, not looking away, letting the reality of what he is seeing travel all the way in. He says to Channa, "What is this?" And Channa, faithful Channa, tells the truth again. He says, "My lord, this is sickness. This is what the body can become when it is attacked from within or without by forces that overwhelm its capacity to maintain itself. This man is ill, seriously ill. And sickness, my lord, sickness like old age comes to all. Not to some people in unfortunate circumstances, not to people who have done something to deserve it. To all, you will be sick someday. I will be sick someday. Your father will be sick. The people you love most in the world will be sick. None of us is exempt from this. The Pali word is vyādi. Sickness, disease, the body's catastrophic failure to maintain the careful internal balance that health requires. Vyādi is the second divine messenger. And if Jara, old age, operates over the slow arc of decades, giving you time to become accustomed to its approach, time to adjust and adapt and find new ways of being in a body that is changing, vyādi is different. Vyādi can arrive without warning. Can arrive in the middle of a healthy Tuesday. Can arrive in the form of a phone call, a blood test result. A pain in the chest or the abdomen or the head that is simply not the kind of pain you have ever felt before, and that your body, with some instinct more ancient than language, immediately recognizes as serious. You have encountered this. Not necessarily in its catastrophic forms, though perhaps you have had that experience too, and if you have, you know what it does to your understanding of the human condition. But even in its minor forms, illness reveals something about the relationship between you and your body, that health carefully conceals. And when you are healthy, genuinely, fully, easily healthy, you have the comfortable illusion that your body is you, that it is reliably yours, under your authority, responsive to your will, available when you need it. You decide to stand up and it stands up. You decide to walk and it walks. You decide to lift something or speak or think or feel, and the body complies so smoothly, so automatically, that the compliance becomes invisible, and you forget that compliance was ever required. Then illness arrives, and suddenly the body is not you, or not only you. It is something separate from you, something that has its own agenda, its own crisis, its own catastrophic internal situation that has nothing to do with your plans for the day or your obligations or your sense of yourself as a functional adult. It becomes, in illness, the most immediate and overwhelming fact of your existence, crowding out everything else. Think of the last time you had a significant fever, how completely it reorganized your world, how the things that mattered so urgently the day before, the deadline, the argument, the project, the social obligation, how all of that simply evaporated in the face of the single overwhelming fact of the body demanding your complete attention. How the entire complex structure of your daily life reduced itself in a matter of hours to get through this. That experience, even at the scale of a fever, which is a very minor version of Bayadi, contains the teaching of the second divine messenger. The body is not your possession, none. It is not your servant. It is the vehicle you are riding in, and it has its own structural vulnerabilities, its own relationship with time and entropy, its own inevitable encounters with the forces that are always working against living systems. And when those forces win a battle, even temporarily, even in a small way, you discover very quickly that you were never as in control as you thought you were. Siddhartha looked at the sick man for a long time. Something was consolidating inside him that had begun with the old man and was now gaining weight, gaining inevitability. The first sight had planted a question. This second sight was beginning to clarify the terms of that question. And if the body is not mine, not reliably, not permanently, not without exception, then who am I if everything I have been taught to value and protect and build my life around is subject to these forces, to the slow erosion of Jara, to the sudden catastrophe of Bayadi? Then what can be trusted? What can be built on? What in this impermanent world could possibly constitute a foundation solid enough to actually stand on? He didn't have the answer yet. The answer was still years away, still requiring the renunciation and the wandering and the asceticism and the night under the Bodhi tree. But the question was forming, the question that would not let him rest. The question that, once it takes root in a sufficiently honest and sufficiently courageous mind, refuses to be quieted by comfort or distraction or the ordinary consolations that most people use to keep it at bay. Channa turned the horses to go back. Then, a third sight, a funeral procession, not at a distance, not glimpsed from the far end of a street and able to be redirected around. It was right there on the road ahead of them. A group of men carrying a body, a corpse, wrapped in cloth, being taken to the burning ground. And following the men carrying the body, a cluster of family members, women wailing, men with faces that wore the specific devastation of fresh loss, children who were too young to fully understand what was happening, but old enough to know that something had been permanently taken away. Siddhartha had never seen a dead body. Not once in 29 years, none. King Suddhodana had been thorough, and so what Siddhartha encountered now, watching the procession pass, was something that most human beings who grow up in the ordinary world encounter much earlier, a direct, unmediated encounter with the fact of death, with what a body looks like when the animating principle that makes it a person has departed, with the specific irreducible difference between a living body and a dead one. That difference is not primarily visible, or not only visible. It is something else, a quality of absence that is more than just the absence of movement or breath or the color of health. It is the absence of the thing that made this particular arrangement of matter into a someone. The specific, unrepeatable selfhood that was this person, their particular way of looking at the world, their memories, their loves, their fears, their voice, their laugh, their way of holding a cup or walking down a street, all of that is gone, and what remains is just matter, just the body, already beginning the process of returning to the elements from which it came. The Pali word is marana, death, the third divine messenger, and marana is where the teaching arrives at its most unavoidable point, because jara you can, with some effort, keep in the background of your consciousness for years at a time. It is slow, it is gradual, its progress not daily news, and body, though it can arrive without warning, is not your constant companion unless you are currently ill. Most days you can go hours or even entire days without remembering that your body is susceptible to catastrophic failure. But marana, death, is different in kind from the other two, because it is not a process, it is not a gradual decline or a temporary condition, it is an ending. An absolute, irreversible, non-negotiable ending, the like of which nothing in ordinary human experience prepares you for. And yet, and this is the thing the Buddha found so remarkable and so urgent about the human situation, and yet it is the thing most universally avoided, most systematically denied, most efficiently kept at the comfortable distance of abstract knowledge rather than felt truth. You know you will die. Of course you know this, everyone knows this. It is, along with taxes, one of the most reliably cited certainties of human existence. The knowledge is not in question. What the Buddha was pointing at, what King Yama will interrogate the dead about, as we will discover, is something different from the knowledge. It is the felt reality. The difference between knowing that you will die as a fact you hold in your mind and truly, viscerally, in your body, understanding it in a way that actually changes how you are living. Most people go their entire lives with the knowledge but without the understanding. And then Siddhartha saw the fourth thing, a wandering ascetic, and a person who had renounced the household life, given up wealth and family and comfort and position, and was walking through the world with nothing but a simple robe and a begging bowl, and a quality of presence that was different from any presence Siddhartha had encountered before, not the absence of the other three. The wanderer was not avoiding old age or sickness or death. He knew what Channa had told Siddhartha, these things come to all. But he had found a different relationship with them, a relationship that was not defined by fear, not organized around avoidance, not structured by the desperate effort to keep the walls high enough for long enough. The wanderer was walking through the world with open eyes, with the messengers acknowledged, and from that acknowledgement, from that willingness to see what was real, had come something that no palace wall had ever been able to manufacture or contain. Channa said, "My lord, that is a wanderer. A person who has given up everything the world considers valuable in order to search for something the world doesn't know how to give. The end of suffering, the way through." And something clicked into place for Siddhartha. Not the answer, the shape of the question, and the understanding that the shape of the question required a different shape of life to answer it. This is what the four sights together accomplish. Not despair, not the morbid conclusion that life is meaningless because it ends, but rather the precise identification of what matters by way of identifying what does not last. Now let me formally introduce you to the teaching we will be following for the rest of our journey, the Devadūta Sutta. Discourse number 130 in the Majjhima Nikaya, the middle-length discourses of the Buddha. Devadūta, the divine messengers. The teaching the Buddha gave at Jetavana Monastery in Savatthi, probably in the middle period of his 45-year teaching life. The teaching describes exactly what Siddhartha saw on the road: old age, sickness, death, but it describes them in a new context, not as the private experience of one young prince on one particular morning, as a cosmic principle operating in every human life, in every realm of existence, inexorable and fair and completely without favoritism. And it describes what happens in vivid, specific, intentionally uncomfortable detail when human beings encounter these messengers and look away. and what happens when they don't. We are going to follow that teaching all the way to its conclusion, including the parts that are difficult, including the parts that challenge the comfortable story most of us carry about the nature of consequences and the nature of the human opportunity, including the remarkable, unexpected thing that happens at the very end of the teaching, when the person you least expect to be moved by the human condition turns out to be moved by it most of all. The road is ahead of us. The messengers are already there. What would have to happen for you to stop looking away? Chapter 4, the Sutta that shook the world. It is perhaps 20 years after the 4 sights, perhaps more. The young man who leaned forward in the chariot with wide eyes, who went home to the palace unable to make the music mean what it used to mean. That young man has been through the fire, literally and figuratively. He has left the palace, which took a courage that is difficult to fully appreciate from the outside. He has walked away from a wife, a child, a kingdom, a father who loved him, every comfort and certainty he had ever known. He has wandered, and he has sat with teachers, great teachers, teachers whose names are still known to us, and learned everything they could teach, and then gone beyond what they could teach, because what they could teach was not yet what he was looking for. He has subjected his body to years of extreme physical austerity, the tradition of asceticism that was standard practice for serious spiritual seekers in ancient India, until he was so thin that he could feel his spine through his abdomen, and until his body was a kind of living skeleton that was still somehow barely alive. And then he understood, with the same directness and honesty that characterized everything he would ever do, that this approach was wrong, not slightly wrong, fundamentally wrong. And he stopped, he ate, he recovered his strength. He sat down under a tree, a pipal tree, a sacred fig, in a place called Bodh Gaya that is still a pilgrimage site today. He sat down with a vow, I will not get up until I have found what I am looking for. And through a night that the tradition describes in visionary language, a night of temptation and clarity, and the progressive dissolution of every distortion that obscures the nature of reality, he found it. He attained Bodhi, awakening, the complete and perfect understanding of how things are, unmediated by preference or avoidance or the distortions of a self that is protecting itself from what it does not want to see. He became the Buddha, the awakened one. And for the next 45 years he walked the roads of northern India, from city to city, from forest grove to forest grove, and from king's court to village square, to the company of monks and nuns in the monasteries that gradually grew up around his teaching. And he taught, tirelessly, specifically, with extraordinary precision and extraordinary compassion, with the patience of a person who knows what is at stake, with the directness of a person who has no reason to soften the truth. Now we arrive at Jetavana, the Garden of Jeta, a large tract of land on the outskirts of Savatthi, the capital of the kingdom of Kosala, one of the most powerful kingdoms in the Gangetic plain during the Buddha's lifetime. The land was purchased by a merchant named Anathapindika, whose name means feeder of the poor, and who was, by all accounts, the most generous lay supporter in the entire early Buddhist community. The story of how he acquired the land is famous. He wanted to give it as a gift to the Buddha, and when he asked the price, the owner, a prince named Jeta, said it was not for sale. Anathapindika persisted. The prince, either mocking him or genuinely curious about the limits of his devotion, said, "You can have it if you can cover the ground with gold coins." Anathapindika went home and began bringing gold coins, cart after cart of them, and servants laid them side by side on the ground, edge to edge, covering the earth of the grove with gold. Prince Jeta, watching this happen, was so moved by the sincerity of the devotion it expressed, or perhaps simply by the spectacle of it, that he donated the trees to accompany the land. And in this grove, for most of the last 25 years of the Buddha's teaching life, Jetavana became home. The monks came here. The lay people came to listen. And here, on some particular evening, we do not have the precise date, but we have the text. the Buddha gathered the monks around him and gave the teaching we call the Devadūta Sutta. Among the monks present, almost certainly Ananda, the Buddha's personal attendant, the devoted, extraordinary being whose memory was so total and so faithful that he became the living archive of the teaching, present for every discourse, capable of reproducing each one word for word. And who would do exactly that at the first Buddhist council, after the Buddha's death, reciting the entire body of the teaching from memory so that it could be written down and preserved? And who loved the Buddha with a completeness and a loyalty that fills his entire account in the canon with warmth and sometimes with the poignant quality of a person who is so close to something extraordinary that he has a harder time seeing it clearly than those who are farther away. Almost certainly also Mahakassapa, the elder, the strict, the one whose practice was defined by rigor rather than warmth, who slept outdoors in charnel grounds, places where bodies were left to decompose, as a deliberate meditation on impermanence, who had looked at death so many times in such direct and physical ways that it had become not a source of terror but a source of clarity. Mahakassapa, who would, after the Buddha's death, hold everything together with the same combination of authority and severity that characterized everything he did. And others, less individually named, less individually known to us. Monks who had joined the Sangha for every variety of reason and every variety of state of practice, from those who were well advanced to those who were just beginning to glimpse what the path was actually about. The Buddha gathered them together, and the light was probably fading by then. The long Indian afternoon settling into the cooler blue of early evening, the birds beginning their evening calls, a particular quality of stillness that comes over a forest grove when the day is winding down. And he said, "Monks, there are 3 divine messengers, 3 beings who appear in front of every human being without exception in the course of every human life. 3 messengers that have been sent, not by the gods in the usual sense, not by external powers, but by the nature of conditioned existence itself, to awaken those who can be awakened. These 3 messengers are old age, sickness, death. They are not invisible, they are not hidden, they are not available only to those with special perception or spiritual training. They appear in the most ordinary forms, the most ordinary contexts, every day to every person." And the Buddha said, "And when a person sees these messengers and allows themselves to be touched by what they are being shown, when they allow the message to land and to change something in how they are living, that is the beginning of everything. That is the root of the path. But when a person sees these messengers and looks away, when they allow the message to reach them and then, through the force of habit and the pull of comfort and the power of distraction, let it dissipate before it can change anything, that person," the Buddha said, "is accumulating something. Not punishment, not sin in a theological sense, simply consequence, an accumulated consequence of a life lived at a remove from what is true." The word Devadūta, divine messenger, deserves a moment because it is doing something interesting. Deva means a divine or celestial being. Dutta means a messenger or emissary. So Devadūta should by rights refer to some kind of heavenly being carrying instructions from on high. And instead, the Buddha uses it to describe an old person on the street, a sick person in a bed, a corpse at a funeral. This is one of the most characteristically brilliant moves in the entire Buddha's teaching career. He is taking a word that suggests the sacred, the elevated, the spiritually significant, and applying it to the most ordinary, the most mundane, the most consistently available features of everyday human experience. He is saying, you do not need a mystical vision. You do not need to travel to a holy site. You do not need a teacher to mediate between you and the truth. The truth is already present, already available, already standing in front of you in the body of the person on the corner or the person in the hospital or the person being carried to the burning ground. You just need to let yourself see it. This is both the most challenging and the most democratically available of all spiritual teachings. It requires nothing external. It requires only the willingness to look at what is already there without looking away. Yet, the Buddha understood with a psychological precision that is as accurate today as it was 25 centuries ago. The looking without looking away is precisely what is hardest, not because the messengers are hidden or difficult to find, but because the trained, habituated human mind has developed extraordinary capacities for not quite seeing what is in front of it, and for processing the image of the old person or the sick person or the funeral and immediately quarantining that image, and putting it in a mental folder labeled "not my problem yet" or "something to think about later" or "sad but not relevant to my current situation," and then getting on with the day. This is what pamada means in practice, not dramatic refusal or conscious avoidance. Just the ordinary, habitual, almost automatic diversion of attention away from what the messengers are saying, back to the comfortable and manageable and immediately relevant. And the Buddha gathered the monks at Jetavana and said, "I am going to tell you what happens to those who encounter the three messengers and keep diverting their attention. I am going to tell you what the consequences of pamada are, and described in specific and vivid terms, because I understand that abstract warnings are easily absorbed and forgotten. Not only something vivid enough to actually land, to actually reach past the comfortable mind's defenses and touch something more fundamental, will change behavior at the level where behavior needs to change." He was right then, he is right now. The Devadūta Sutta is not a comfortable text. It is not a teaching designed to make you feel good or to affirm that you are basically okay and things will probably work out. It is a teaching designed to wake you up. And waking up, as anyone who has been woken up abruptly from a deep sleep knows, is not always a gentle experience. We are going to follow this teaching all the way through, and including the court of King Yama, including the hell realms, and including, finally at the end, the extraordinary and unexpected thing that King Yama himself says, which rewrites everything that came before it. But first, a moment of honesty about where you are right now, not about your spiritual practice or your religious beliefs or your philosophical positions, about something more basic. You are alive, right now, in this body that is aging, that can get sick without warning, that will die. This is not a theoretical proposition. This is the most basic fact of your situation. And inside that fact, inside the acknowledged reality of mortality, you have a life. Specific, particular, irreplaceable. A particular set of capacities and relationships and possibilities. A particular way of thinking and feeling and moving through the world. A particular window of time. The Buddha's question, the question the Devadūta Sutta asks on every page, is, what are you doing with it? Nanda heard this question and carried it with him for the rest of his life. Mahakassapa organized his entire practice around it. Thousands of monks and nuns over 25 centuries have taken it as the organizing question of their lives. It is now being asked of you. The court of King Yama is ahead. Let us go. Chapter 5. Yama's Court. A trail no one wins unprepared. There is a quality of inevitability about what happens in the Devadūta Sutta after the three divine messengers are named. Once the Buddha has established the three messengers, once he has said plainly, and with his characteristic refusal to soften what does not need softening, that every human being encounters old age, sickness, and death, the next question is inescapable. And what then? And what happens to the person who has spent their life encountering these three messengers and diverting their attention away from what the messengers were saying? The Buddha's answer begins with a setting. A courtroom, not a human courtroom, not the kind of place where lawyers argue and evidence is presented, and a human judge weighs competing interpretations of ambiguous facts. This is a different kind of courtroom. The courtroom of King Yama, the realm of the dead, where the ambiguity has already been stripped away and what remains is simply the unmediated truth of how a life was lived. Yama, Yamaraja, the king and judge of the dead, is one of the most ancient figures in the Indian religious imagination. predating Buddhism by centuries, present in the Rig Veda, present in Iranian religion, now present in traditions stretching across the Indo-European world. But the Buddha's use of Yama in the Devadūta Sutta does something distinctive and important with this ancient figure. In many traditions, a figure like Yama would be a punisher, an executioner, the instrument of divine wrath, administering suffering as a form of cosmic justice. The Buddha's Yama is different. He is an administrator, a record keeper, a witness, a person who asks questions rather than pronouncing sentences, and whose questions reveal with terrible precision not what he thinks about the person before him, but what the person reveals about themselves through their own answers. The soldiers of the lower realms bring a person before Yama. This person has died, has completed whatever time was available to them, and has now arrived at this reckoning. And this person, during their lifetime, lived in a specific way. They did things with their body, with their speech, with their minds that caused harm to others, to themselves, to the fabric of what is good and right and beneficial in the world. Not necessarily dramatic harm, not necessarily the harm of a murderer or a conqueror. The ordinary harm of a person who lived at a sufficient remove from the three messengers that the orientation of their inner life never quite made the turn toward what matters. Yama does not immediately condemn this person and does not immediately assign a punishment. He sits and he asks a question. The question is, did you see the first divine messenger? That's it. Did you see it? Not, what did you know about aging? Not, and did you understand the philosophical implications of impermanence? Not, were you aware on an intellectual level that your body would decline? Simply, did you see the first divine messenger? The person standing before Yama says, "No, Lord, I did not see it." And now Yama does something that is, if you read it carefully, one of the most psychologically astute moves in the entire canon. He does not challenge the denial. He does not say you are lying. He asks a follow-up question. He says, "You never saw an old person? You never, in the course of your life, however many years you lived, encountered a human being who was old, and whose back was bent forward by the accumulated weight of years, whose hands trembled, whose hair had gone white and thin, who walked only with assistance, leaning on a staff because the body could no longer support itself without one? Who looked out from eyes that had seen 80 or 90 or 100 years of this world? You never saw anyone like that." The person considers. Now, of course they have seen someone like that. Everyone has seen someone like that. And so they say, "Yes, Lord, I did see someone like that." Yama says, "And did you not think, when you saw them, did you not think, this will happen to me? Not to someone else, not to people who are less fortunate or less careful or less healthy or less blessed. To me, I too will age. I too will arrive at that condition. And because I am currently not yet there, because I currently have health and capacity and time, this is precisely when I should be doing the things that matter. This is precisely when I should be turning my life in the right direction, not later. Not when things slow down now. Did you have that thought?" And the person standing before Yama says, with the devastating honesty that the tradition says the truth of that moment requires, that they cannot deny, "I had that thought, and then I did not act on it. I was heedless." The court is very quiet. The weight of that admission does not come from Yama's reaction. It comes from the person's own understanding, finally arrived at too late, of what they have lost. Not years of life. Years are not what is lost. And what is lost is the opportunity, the specific, unrepeatable opportunity that a human life in contact with the three divine messengers constitutes. The opportunity to hear the message and to change, to turn the direction of the inner life, to begin the work that needs to be done while the body is still capable and the mind is still clear, and the time has not yet run out. That opportunity is not available in Yama's court. It was available in the ordinary Tuesday that passed while the message was being diverted and the attention was being managed elsewhere. It was available in the 100 moments over the course of a lifetime where the message arrived and the choice was made, quickly and automatically and without fully deciding to not let it in. Yama asks the second question. Did you see the second divine messenger? And again, the person before him says, no, Lord, I did not see it. And again, Yama does not challenge the denial. He asks, you never saw someone seriously ill? Someone whose body had turned against them, or been turned against by forces it could not withstand, in such a way that the ordinary management of life became impossible. Someone who lay in their own waste because they could not move. Someone who needed the most basic things done for them by others. Someone in whose face you could see clearly what a body looks like when the forces that hold it together begin to yield to the forces that are always working against it. You never saw something like that? The person says, yes, Lord, I saw it. And Yama says, did you think, when you saw it, did you think, this can happen to me? Not to people who have done something wrong, not to people who are different from me in some way that makes them more susceptible. To me, my body is subject to this. The same forces that produced what I am seeing could produce it in me without warning, without negotiation, without my consent. And because I currently have health, because the forces are currently in balance in my favor, this is exactly when I should be using the time wisely. Did you think that? I was heedless, Lord. The third question, and did you see the third divine messenger? I did not see it. You never saw a corpse? 1 day after death, 2 days, 3 days, the body unmistakably no longer inhabited, the animating presence gone, a matter that had been a person beginning its return to the elements. You never stood at the edge of a grave or watched a body carried to a funeral pyre or encountered, in any form, the irreducible fact that human bodies stop. Never saw that? Yes, Lord, I saw that. Did you think, I too will die? Not eventually in the comfortable abstract future sense that makes the fact feel less urgent, but actually, specifically, certainly, I, this person, this body, this specific and unrepeatable arrangement of matter that I call myself, I will die. The thing I am looking at will happen to me. And because it has not happened yet, because I still have time, because the window is still open, I should use the window now, while I can. I was heedless, Lord. And then Yama says the sentence that is the heart of the entire teaching. And the sentence that Yama delivers not with anger. There is no anger in the canonical description of Yama's demeanor. And not with satisfaction or triumph or the kind of energy that attaches to punishment as revenge. Not, he says it simply. As a statement of what is true, he says, Akario, your kin did not create this, not your mother, not your father, not your siblings, not your teachers or your friends or any other person who shared your life, not any god or fate or external force. You created this with your own intentions, with your own choices, with the sustained orientation of your own heart, held over the course of a lifetime in which you had every possible opportunity to turn it differently. You are the author of this, and you will read what you wrote. Take a moment with this, not as theology, not as a belief system you are being asked to adopt, as a mirror. You are standing before Yama right now. Not literally, you are alive listening to this, but in imagination, in the space that these words have created. And you can ask yourself, with whatever honesty you can bring to this particular Tuesday, the 3 questions that Yama asks. Did you see the first messenger? Not just glance at old age as an abstract concept. And did you let the reality of aging, the specific reality of what happens to bodies, including the body you are living in right now, did you let that land? Did it change anything? Did you see the second? And did you let the reality of sickness, not someone else's sickness, managed at the comfortable distance of a news story or a hospital visit, but the fundamental vulnerability of your own body, and the fact that your health is not a permanent condition but a temporary equilibrium, did you let that reach you in a way that actually mattered? Did you see the third? Did you let death be real to you, not the death of others? Not death in the abstract, not death as a theological proposition about what happens afterward, but your death, a specific and certain end of this specific and irreplaceable life, real enough to change something about how you spend your time. These are not questions Yama will ask you someday. They are questions you are already answering every day, in the small choices about where to put your attention, and what to let in, and what to keep at a comfortable distance. The answers you are living right now are the answers you will bring to the court. Chapter 6. What your karma actually is after the 3 questions, after the 3 admissions, after the silence that follows the 3rd admission, the silence that carries more weight than any sentence could. Yama says the thing on. The thing that is both the simplest and the most radical statement about the nature of human responsibility that any tradition has ever produced. He says, "This was not done by your mother. It was not done by your father. And it was not done by any member of your family, any friend, any teacher, any person who influenced your life in any way. It was not done by the society you were born into, the circumstances that surrounded you, the conditions that shaped you. It was not done by the gods or by fate or by the position of the stars at the moment of your birth. You did this and you will receive what you did. That is karma. And that is the teaching the Buddha considered so fundamental that he returned to it again and again throughout the 45 years of his teaching career, in 100 different contexts and from 100 different angles, always arriving at the same irreducible core. Intentional action produces results. The results arise from the intention, not from the action's external appearance. And the results are not administered by any external authority. They arise from the nature of what was done, as naturally and as inevitably as a seed produces the plant that was always inside it. Let me be very specific about what karma is not, because the misunderstandings are significant. Karma is not punishment. This is perhaps the most important misconception to address. The hell realms that the Devadūta Sutta describes, and the suffering that follows the person who lived in pamada. These are not penalties administered by an offended cosmic authority. There is no cosmic authority in the Buddhist framework who is offended by your choices and who decides to make you suffer in proportion to the offense. No, the relationship between action and consequence in the Buddhist teaching is more like the relationship between a cause and its effect than like the relationship between a crime and its sentence. When water is heated, it boils, not because anything is punishing the water, but because that is what hot water does. The consequence arises from the nature of the cause, not from the decision of any external judge. Karma is not fate. This is the second major misconception. Karma does not mean that what happens to you is predetermined, that your life was written before you lived it, that the choices you make are not really choices at all, because the outcome was already settled. The Buddhist teaching of karma is almost the exact opposite of fatalism. It says what you do matters. The intention behind each action is generating real effects in this life and beyond it, which means that right now, in this moment, in this choice, in this orientation of attention, you are producing karma. You are generating consequence. The future is not fixed. It is being shaped right now by what you are doing with your inner life. And karma is not simply about what goes around coming around in the vague social sense that the word has acquired in popular usage. It is not cosmic scorekeeping, tallying good deeds against bad ones and producing a net moral score. It is something at once more precise and more radical than that. The Pali word for intention is cetana, and the Buddha said something that stopped everyone in the room when he first said it. Something so precise and so important that it has been quoted and commented on in every generation of Buddhist scholarship since. Natanaham bhikkhava kammam vadami. Monks, I call intention karma, not action, intention. And the consequences that are being generated by your choices arise not from the visible external actions, the things you do that can be observed and described from the outside, but from the intention that produces those actions, and from the orientation of the will, from what you were actually trying to do, beneath the surface of what you appeared to do. This matters enormously. Because it means that the primary location of the most consequential activity in your life is not visible to anyone else. It is your inner life. The quality of your attention, the orientation of your heart, the intentions that arise in you in the 10,000 ordinary moments of an ordinary day, and the choices you make about whether to act from those intentions or to redirect them. This is why the three divine messengers are so important to the teaching of karma. Because the messengers, when they are genuinely received, when they are allowed to land and to do their work, change the orientation of the heart. They shift something at the level of intention. The person who has truly let in the reality of old age, sickness, and death is a different person from the person who has kept them at a comfortable distance. Not different in their circumstances, not different in the eyes of the world, but different in the interior, in what they actually value, in what they actually fear, in where they actually direct their energy and attention. And that interior difference generates different karma, different consequence, different future. The Greek king Melinda understood philosophy. He had been educated in the Greek tradition, had engaged with Platonic and Aristotelian thought, had the sophisticated conceptual framework that Greek education produced. When he came to sit with the monk Nagasena, it was not as a credulous devotee but as a rigorous intellectual, looking for arguments to test and positions to challenge. The question he asked about karma is one of the most penetrating in the history of philosophical dialogue. He said, if, as the Buddhist teaching claims, there is no permanent self, if what we call I is not a fixed enduring entity but a constantly changing stream of physical and mental events, no one of which persists from one moment to the next, then who bears the karma? If the person who acts in one life is not, in any strict sense, the same person who receives the consequences in a future life, then the entire moral structure of the teaching seems to collapse. The wrong is done by one person, and the suffering is endured by another. How can this be just? Nagasena considered, and then he said, let me ask you about fire. If you light a candle, a single flame burning in a specific place, and then from that flame you light another candle, that second candle burns all night while the first burns out and is extinguished. Is the flame burning in the second candle the same flame that was burning in the first? King Melinda thought about this carefully. No, because he was a rigorous thinker and he was not going to give a careless answer. He said, no, it is not the same flame. The molecules of combustion are different, the wax is different, the location is different, not the same flame. Nagasena said, is it a completely different flame, having no relationship, no continuity, no connection to the first flame? Melinda paused longer this time. He said, no, that's not right either. A second flame arose from the first. It carries the fire that the first flame transmitted. There is a continuity, not of identity, but of transmission. Nagasena said, this is how karma works. The person who acts and the person who receives the consequences of those actions are neither identical nor completely different. They are connected by the stream of intention, by cetana, which is not a fixed self, but a pattern, a direction, a momentum that continues even as the specific physical and mental components that carry it change. The flame does not need to be the same flame to carry the fire forward. The continuity is real even when the identity is not. King Melinda sat with this for a long time. He said, it is a subtle teaching. Nagasena said, it is the truth. Here is what this means for you right now, the ordinary Tuesday of your life. Every moment, you are generating karma, not in a way that requires special awareness or spiritual training to notice, though training does make the process more visible. Simply by virtue of being alive and having intentions and acting on them, you are producing consequence. The quality of that consequence, its direction, its weight, its eventual fruit, is determined by the quality of your intentions, by the orientation of your heart in this moment. When you speak to someone from a place of genuine interest in them, When you put down what you were thinking and actually listen, and actually let them exist as a full person rather than as a supporting character in your own story, you are planting a seed of a particular kind. When you act from generosity, from the genuine desire to give without needing return, you are planting a different kind of seed from the one planted by giving as a social performance or giving to create obligation. When you sit in meditation, even for 5 minutes, even imperfectly, nod, even with a mind that keeps wandering, you are practicing the orientation of attention toward what is actually present. That practice accumulates. Not dramatically, not in ways that are easy to measure, but as a slow and real shift in the default direction of the mind. And when you live in a way that keeps the three divine messengers at a comfortable distance, when you make the 10,000 small choices that constitute pamada, the accumulated looking away, the sustained preference for comfortable distraction over uncomfortable clarity, you are planting that. Day by day, choice by choice, moment by moment. Yama did not create the situation he described to the person before him. He witnessed it. He was reading back to that person the account of their own authorship, the account that had been written, one intention at a time. Over the course of a lifetime, you are writing that account right now with this moment, and this one, and this one. The teaching of Kama is not dark. It is in the end the most hopeful teaching that exists, because it says, you are not a fixed thing. You are not doomed to continue doing what you have always done. The direction of the stream can change. The flame can be redirected. Not instantly, not without effort, not without the willingness to actually let the messengers in, but really, genuinely, actually changed. This is what Nagasena was telling King Milinda. Not just about rebirth, about this life, about the next 5 minutes. The intention you bring to the next 5 minutes is generating real consequence, real direction, real future. What will you plant? Chapter 7, The Hell Realms. Not a fairy tale. I want to speak directly to you before we go further. What comes next in the Devadūta Sutta is the most vivid section of the teaching, the most physically specific, the most deliberately, carefully uncomfortable. And the Buddha describes hell, not vaguely, not in the comfortable generalizations of a tradition that wants to suggest consequences without committing to their specifics. In detail, with the kind of physical precision that reaches past the processing mind and lands somewhere more primal. And I want to be clear about why before we go in. The Buddha was, throughout his entire teaching career, not precisely calibrated. He did not say more than was needed. He did not add detail for its own sake. Every specific in his teaching is there because it serves a purpose, because it accomplishes something that a less specific version could not accomplish. The specificity of the hell realms in the Devadūta Sutta serves a particular purpose. It is not to create fear, though fear may arise. It is not to threaten, though the threatening quality is undeniable. It is to make the stakes real. Make the consequences of pamada vivid enough to actually penetrate the comfortable mind's defenses, to reach the place where decisions are actually made, to do what abstraction cannot do. The Buddha understood with the psychological precision that characterizes everything he taught, that human beings respond to vividness in a way that they do not respond to abstraction. You can tell someone, in abstract terms, that a choice has serious consequences. You can explain the mechanism. You can make the logical case, and the person will nod and absorb the information and file it somewhere, and tomorrow they will make the same choice they always made. Because the abstract did not reach the level where choices are actually generated. Show someone something vivid, something concrete and specific and impossible to comfortably translate into the language of management and deflection, and something different happens. Something more fundamental is reached, and from that more fundamental place, different choices become possible. This is why the Buddha describes the hell realms, not to scare you into submission, to make the cost of heedlessness real enough to actually matter. With that said, let us go in. After the 3 questions, after Yama's declaration about Kama, The soldiers of the hell realm take the person who died in Pamada and bring them to the first punishment. The Sutta describes it precisely. They drive 5 iron stakes through the body, 1 through each hand, 1 through each foot, 1 through the center of the chest. Stakes of iron, red hot, burning, and the person suffers from this. Experiences pain beyond the ordinary scale of pain. Experiences what the text calls feelings that are sharp and severe and painful, but the person does not die, cannot die, because their karma, the accumulated weight of a life lived at a sufficient remove from what is real, has not yet been exhausted. The consequences continue as long as the cause requires them to continue. And the soldiers lay the person down and chop them with axes. Then they stand the person upside down and cut them with knives. Then they bind the person to a chariot and drag them back and forth across burning ground. A field of iron, heated red, a surface that is itself a form of fire. The person is dragged across this surface back and forth while the burning continues. Then they are forced up and down a mountain of burning coals, and compelled to climb and descend while the burning continues. Then they are inverted and thrown into a great cauldron of oil, boiling oil, churning oil. And in that cauldron, a person is carried up and down and sideways, rising to the surface and sinking to the depths and drifting sideways in the current. For what the text says is a very long time, many years, many hundreds of years, many thousands of years. Through all of this, the person lives. The karma is not yet exhausted. And then finally, the person is thrown into what the Sutta calls the Mahaniraya, the great hell. And the text describes its physical structure with the formal precision of a technical specification. 4 corners, 4 doors, walls of iron on all 4 sides, an iron roof above, an iron floor below, the entire structure blazing, red hot, its heat extending for vast distances in every direction. And the person is there in that structure for as long as the karma of a lifetime of pamada requires now. What is the Buddha doing here? Not what is the teaching inside the imagery. Buddhaghosa, the great 5th century commentator, monk, whose Visuddhimagga remains the most comprehensive systematic treatment of Theravada Buddhist doctrine and practice. Buddhaghosa engaged with the hell realms with the same rigor and care he brought to every subject. Visuddhimagga, the hell realms are not metaphors. They are not symbolic representations of psychological states coded in vivid imagery for literary effect. They are actual realms of existence, actual states that actual consciousness can inhabit, defined by the specific quality of experience that characterizes them. A realm in the Buddhist cosmology is not primarily a place. It is a quality of experience, a mode of consciousness. The difference between the human realm and the hell realms is not primarily a geographical difference, not a difference in where you are, but a qualitative difference in what experience is like, in what is possible to feel and know and do. And the hell realms are defined by a particular quality of experience, the total, absolute, unrelieved dominance of suffering, not suffering as it exists in the human realm, interspersed with pleasure, occasionally relieved by beauty or connection or the small joys that appear even in difficult lives, but suffering as the only content of experience, and suffering without relief, without gap, without the possibility of the kind of strategic withdrawal into distraction or pleasure or numbness that makes human suffering bearable. Are these realms literally true, in the sense that a scientist would use the word literally? The Buddhist tradition has held different views on this question at different times and in different cultural contexts. The Theravada tradition, in which the Devadūta Sutta lives, treats them with a specificity that suggests direct cosmological reality. Some later Buddhist traditions, particularly those that developed in contact with Chinese philosophical sensibilities, have interpreted them more as descriptions of states of mind, as the outer projection of inner conditions, a literalization of what a consciousness dominated by greed or hatred or delusion creates for itself. Both of these readings point towards something true, and neither of them is irrelevant to your life right now. Because here is what you know from your own experience, whatever your metaphysical commitments. The mind is capable of creating states of suffering so total, so all-consuming, so without apparent exit, that they constitute a kind of inner hell. You may have touched this yourself, the person in the depths of a major depressive episode. Not the gray sadness of ordinary unhappiness, but the specific experience of a mind in which every perception has been filtered through a lens that removes color and meaning and possibility until the world is a uniform flatness of pointlessness. That person is in something that functions very much like a hell realm, not as a metaphor, as an actual state of experience in which the ordinary goods of human life have become inaccessible and suffering is the only content. The person in the grip of addiction at its most advanced stage, the person who knows that what they are doing is destroying everything, and yet cannot stop, cannot access the part of themselves that would choose differently. It is trapped in a loop that continues regardless of their will. That person is in something that functions like a hell realm. The person in the grip of grief so acute that the world has lost its dimensionality, in which every present moment is an unbearable reminder of what has been lost, and in which the capacity to imagine a future in which things might be different has simply gone offline. That person is in something that functions like a hell realm. These states are not metaphors for anything. They are real. They are what happens when the quality of experience becomes sufficiently contracted, sufficiently dominated by suffering, sufficiently cut off from the ordinary goods of human life. And the Buddhist tradition, describing the hell realms, is describing these states at their most extreme possible intensity and their most extended possible duration. What generates these states? The karma of a lifetime of pamada, the accumulated weight of intentions organized around harm, or around the sustained avoidance of what is real, or around the centeredness in a self that is trying to protect itself from the messengers at the cost of its genuine life. There is a king in this story whose name has become inseparable from the teaching of consequence in the early Buddhist tradition. King Ajatasattu. The name means born enemy, aim that is itself a statement about what his birth represented, the conflict that surrounded it and followed it. He was the son of King Bimbisara, one of the most significant royal supporters the Buddha ever had. Bimbisara had been a lay disciple of genuine devotion, a man who genuinely engaged with the teaching and whose support made possible many of the most important periods of the Buddha's ministry. And Ajatasattu killed him and had his own father imprisoned in the story that has come down to us and left to die possibly. The accounts vary in their specifics by starvation, possibly by having his feet cut and salt rubbed in the wounds. And the accounts of the manner of Bimbisara's death differ. What they agree on is that Ajatasattu caused it deliberately because he wanted the throne and was not willing to wait for it. Patricide, the killing of one's father, is a Buddhist ethical framework, one of the 5 actions that produce immediate and severe karmic consequence regardless of any other factor. The 5 are killing one's mother, killing one's father, killing an arahant, injuring a Buddha, and causing a schism in the Sangha. These 5 are called anantarika kama, actions of immediate consequence, because their weight is such that no other action in the same lifetime can override their trajectory. Ajatasattu knew this. After he came to power, after the initial satisfaction of ambition had faded, and the face of what he had done became visible to him in the way that faces of done things have of becoming visible over time, he went to the Buddha. Samanyaphala Sutta records this visit in detail. Ajatasattu coming at night, coming almost in disguise, not coming with the anxiety and the guilt of a man who has done something he cannot undo and is not sure what to do with that knowledge. The Buddha received him, did not condemn him, did not refuse to teach him, sat with him and talked with him and allowed the teaching to do what teaching does when the person receiving it is genuinely open to what it is saying. And the sutta says that at the end of the conversation, Ajatasattu experienced something, some real movement toward clarity, some genuine moment of seeing that left him different from how he had arrived. But different, the text suggests, was not enough. And The weight of the karma was too specific, too direct, too comprehensive. Ajatasattu could experience the teaching, could feel its truth, could know, intellectually and in some deeper way, that the path was available to him. But he could not make the turn. The weight of what he had done was too much of an anchor. The guilt that the Buddhist tradition understood not as a psychological state, but as the actual beginning of karma's consequence. That guilt was already doing its work. He died, the accounts say, in terror. The specific bodily terror of someone who knows what is coming and cannot stop it from coming. The third divine messenger arrived for Ajatasattu not as the gentle teacher it can be for those who have prepared, but as the thing you were afraid it was all along. I tell you this not to frighten you, but to illustrate something the Devadūta Sutta is very precise about, the relationship between the karma of a lifetime and the experience of dying. The Buddha taught throughout his ministry that the quality of the dying mind, the orientation of consciousness at the moment of death, has particular significance for what follows. Not because death is more important than life, but because the dying mind tends to go where the practiced mind has trained it to go. The person who has spent decades practicing the orientation of awareness toward what is genuinely good, who has allowed the messengers in, who has lived in some meaningful version of appamada, that person's dying mind tends to find its way to the orientation it has been practicing. The person who has spent decades in the sustained avoidance of what is real, who has trained the mind in the direction of comfortable distraction, that mind, at the moment of dying, when the ordinary supports of distraction are gone, may find itself in exactly the territory it has been practicing, stripped of everything that was keeping it at bay. This is not a comfortable teaching. It was not meant to be comfortable. It was meant to produce appamada, and to make the stakes of how you spend your ordinary days real enough to actually matter. Before we go to Kisā Gotami, and we are going to Kisā Gotami, I promise, the story needs to breathe after this, needs what she brings. Let me say one more thing about the hell realms. Moggallana saw them directly, a great disciple of psychic powers. The person the canon describes as having the most developed capacity for perception beyond ordinary human range. Moggallana saw these realms in direct meditation, as immediate and specific as the room you are sitting in right now, and he came back from what he saw not traumatized, not destroyed, not frozen in existential dread. He came back practicing, harder, with more urgency, more precision, more gratitude for the human birth that gave him the capacity to practice at all. That is what the hell realms are supposed to do. Not break you, not paralyze you, wake you up to the specific and irreplaceable value of the opportunity you currently have. You are alive, you are breathing, the window is open. What will you do with the next 5 minutes? Chapter 8. Kisā Gotami and the mustard seed. We need to stop, we need to breathe. We have been through difficult territory. The territory that the Buddha believed was necessary. Necessary to penetrate the comfortable mind's defenses, necessary to reach the place where real choices are actually made. It is territory that can leave a particular residue if we do not balance it with something else. So now we turn to a different kind of fire, not the fire of consequence and the fire of hell realms, the fire of love meeting loss. The fire of a human heart confronting the third divine messenger, not in a Buddhist court, not in a philosophical framework, not with any distance at all, but in the middle of an ordinary street, carrying something that cannot be put down, looking for someone who can help. Her name was Kisā Gotami. The first part of her name, Kisā, means thin. This was how she was known, the thin Gotami, a woman from a poor family, which in the hierarchical social world of ancient India meant a woman who occupied a disadvantaged position in almost every context that mattered. She married into a wealthier family, which should have improved her situation, but the text suggests she was not fully accepted there, remained somehow on the margins of her husband's household, treated as less than by the people around her, and then she became pregnant, and she gave birth to a son. We do not know the child's name. We do not know much about the specific texture of the life Kisa Gotami lived in those months of pregnancy and those first months of motherhood. But we can imagine, because these things are universal, because this particular experience crosses every barrier of culture and century, what it meant to her. Not just the practical reality of a child, the belonging, the being valued, the specific, irreplaceable joy of a life that is both entirely itself and entirely yours to love. And then the child died. We do not know how. The texts do not tell us the cause, and the omission feels right, because the cause does not matter, because death by any cause is death, because what the story is about is not the how but the after. The after that begins when a parent realizes that the child is gone and has been gone, and nothing they do from this moment forward will change that. Kisagotami could not accept it. This is the most important fact in the story, and I want to be careful not to pass over it. Could not accept it, not would not refuse to, not chose not to, could not. The distinction matters because what she was experiencing was not a philosophical position or a moral failure or a deficiency of courage. It was the absolute primal, pre-linguistic response of a human organism to the loss of something that was woven into the center of its being. The refusal that arises not from the will, but from the place that is deeper than the will, and the place that does not yet know how to accommodate this information. She carried the child through the streets of Savatthi, looking for medicine, going from door to door, person to person, asking, "Do you have something that can help? Do you know someone who can bring him back? Do you know of a medicine, a healer, a teacher who can undo this?" And the people she encountered responded in the way that people respond to this kind of grief, with the helplessness and the pity and the slight, involuntary stepping back that happens when we are confronted with suffering too large for our ordinary social tools to address. They felt for her, they were sorry, and they did not know what to do. Because there is no ordinary human response adequate to what she was carrying. Someone finally said, "Go to the man in the grove outside the city, the monk, the teacher. He sees things differently. Go to him." She went. The Buddha saw her. He saw the child she was carrying. He saw the state she was in. And the texts emphasize that he saw it fully, that he allowed himself to actually perceive what was in front of him. The same quality of non-averting seeing that had characterized Siddhartha on the road outside the palace 30 years before. And he said, "I can help you. I know of a medicine." Her whole body must have lifted at those words. The exhaustion of grief makes you very sensitive to any suggestion of reversal, of the possibility that the thing that cannot be changed might be changed. Her body, her breath, everything would have changed with those 7 words. He said, "Bring me a mustard seed, a single mustard seed. They are common. You can find them in any kitchen, in any market stall. But it must come from a household that has never known death. A house where no one has ever died." She said, "I will find one, I will bring it to you." And she went back into the city. She knocked on the first door. She asked, "Do you have a mustard seed?" The family said, "Yes, of course." She asked, "Odd, has anyone in this household ever died?" They said, "Our grandfather died 2 years ago. He was very old, and it was," they said, "a good death, a peaceful death, and they had made their peace with it. But yes, death had been here." And she thanked them and went to the next door. "Do you have a mustard seed?" "Yes." "Has anyone died here?" "My mother," they said, "last winter. It was very sudden. She had been well, and then she was not, and then she was gone. And 3 weeks from the first symptom to the last breath, they were still not through the shock of it." The next door, "Yes, we have mustard seeds. But our son was young. He was only 23. It was an accident. He has been gone for 6 months and we are still not." "Yes, death has been here." The next door, and the next, and the next. By midday, she had been to dozens of houses. By afternoon, dozens more. By evening, she had moved through more of the city than she had seen in years of living there. And the same answer had come, in every voice, with every face, with every specific story. "Yes, we have mustard seeds, but death has been here too. Different deaths. Deaths from age and deaths from sickness and deaths from accident. and deaths that seemed senseless, and deaths that seemed like a mercy, and young deaths and old deaths, and deaths that left the family devastated, and deaths that left the family at some kind of peace. 100 different versions of the one thing. Death has been here too. By the time the day was done, something had moved in Kisagotami. Not because the Buddha had explained anything to her. He had not. He had sent her into the city with a task, and the task had taught her something that no explanation could have reached. She had not been told about impermanence. She had walked through it, door by door, face by face, story by story. She had encountered the community of the bereaved, and she had discovered, not as information but as lived experience, that she was already a member. She was not an exception. Her child's death was not a unique catastrophe that had befallen her alone in a world where everyone else moved through life in safety. She was one thread in a tapestry that covered every house in the city, a tapestry of everyone who has ever loved and lost, which is to say, everyone. She went back to the grove. The body of her son was no longer in her arms in the same way. She had laid it down somewhere in the city, in the place where the dead are laid. And she had let something else be carried instead, some beginning of understanding, some first thread of what would eventually become a practice, and then an attainment, and then the freedom that the texts say she ultimately found. She sat at the Buddha's feet. She said, "The mustard seed. I could not find one. None. Every house had seeds. But every house had known death," he said. "You went to find a seed, and instead you found what you needed in all of the city, in all of the world. Has anyone at all, across all of human history in every land, has anyone escaped this?" she said. "No, Lord," he said. "Then you are not alone. The grief you feel is real. The loss is real. The love that makes the loss so devastating, that too is real. And it is precious. But what you are feeling is not the exception to human existence. It is the center of it. And when you know that, when you really know it, not as an abstract fact, but as something lived, something becomes possible that was not possible before. Grief is not the exception. It is the common ground, the place where every human being eventually arrives. And arriving there, being willing to stand there, to know that you are standing there, and without the comfortable fiction that you are somehow different from everyone else who has ever stood there. That arrival is not the end of the story. It is, in the Buddhist teaching, the beginning of one possible version of the deepest story. She took the robes. She became a bhikkhuni, a member of the order of nuns. She practiced the Therigatha, the verses of the elder nuns. And one of the most extraordinary collections in the entire Pali Canon includes her enlightenment verse. It is brief and luminous and says, among other things, "The path has been found. I have entered the stream. The great mirror has been obtained. The mirror of the teaching, the mirror of impermanence, the mirror that showed her door by door that she was not alone." There is another woman whose story belongs here. Her name was Patakara. If Kisagotami's loss was devastating, Patakara's was the kind of loss that strains the ability of language to contain it. She lost her husband, died in the forest during a storm. She was with him and could not reach him in time, found him already gone. She lost her firstborn son, drowned in a river crossing, swept away by a current she was powerless to fight. She lost her baby, taken by a hawk as she stood at the water's edge, a thing so sudden and so impossible that the mind cannot quite take it in, even in the telling. She went home to find her parents. A roof had collapsed in the storm, gone too. Her brother as well. The family home destroyed. She arrived in Savatthi without clothes, without anything, not without language for what had happened, because language was not equipped for the scale of it. People moved away from her. She was the kind of loss that exceeded the ordinary social containers for grief. And people did what people do when the container overflows. They made space, they moved to the side, they let the suffering pass without engaging it, because engaging it would require something they did not know how to give. A Buddha saw her. He said, "Sister," one word, but the right word, the word that said, "I see you, you are not invisible, you have not been swallowed by this, you are still here, still someone, still seen." She stopped. He said, "Recover your presence of mind." She sat down, she heard the teaching. And what the text says happened next is one of the most compressed and powerful descriptions of awakening in the early canon. She attained stream entry, the first stage, the entry into the stream that runs toward liberation, the point of no return beyond which the journey has a guaranteed conclusion, even if many lives remain in the traveling. She said, later he taught the path. I entered the stream. I pulled the arrow of grief from my own heart. The arrow of grief. Not the grief itself, the arrow that keeps the grief infected, that prevents the wound from healing. That turns loss into a permanent condition rather than a profound experience. The arrow the Buddha taught elsewhere is the second wound we inflict on ourselves. The suffering we add to suffering through our resistance to it, not through our insistence that it should not be what it is. Through the refusal that is so understandable and so universal and yet so costly. Kisa Gotami carried her dead child through the city. Matakara arrived at the grove stripped of everything, both of them, in the moment of full contact with what had happened, in the moment of receiving the teaching that made the truth livable, found something that no amount of happiness or comfort or the absence of loss could have given them. The Buddha said this about karuna, compassion, not pity, not the comfortable emotion you feel when observing suffering from a safe distance. Something that comes from the root word for trembling, the internal movement that happens when you allow the suffering of none other to actually reach you, actually land in your body, actually register as real rather than as something to be processed and managed at a comfortable distance. Kisa Gotami became that. Patatsara became that, not despite their losses, through them. The losses opened them to the community of human suffering in a way that made genuine compassion possible, the kind that does not flinch, that does not step back, that can be present with what is genuinely difficult because it has already been present with what was unsurvivable and discovered that it survived. There is someone in your life right now who is carrying something too large for the ordinary containers. Someone whose loss has been too recent or too complete or too specific for the standard social responses to reach. Someone who needs to be seen with the same direct and unevading quality of attention that Siddhartha brought to the old man on the road, that the Buddha brought to Kisa Gotami outside the grove. What would it mean to bring that quality of attention? What would it mean to say simply, "I see you, you are not alone. Death has been here too, in every house, behind every door, in every life that has ever been lived. You are not the exception, you are the community." Chapter 9. Angulimala. The killer heed the final messenger. There is a question that arises, sooner or later, in every serious encounter with the teaching of Kama. Arises with particular sharpness when we have just come through the territory we have covered in the last 2 chapters. The hell realms, the consequences of pamada described in their most vivid and specific form, the weight of Yama's declaration that the person before him is the author of their own situation. The question is, can anything be forgiven? Not forgiven in the theological sense, not washed clean by the intervention of a divine authority, but transformed, turned, redirected, and a life that has generated a particular kind of karma actually change the direction of that stream. Can the flame be moved? No. Or is there a point of no return, a threshold of accumulated harmful action beyond which the trajectory is simply set and cannot be altered? The Buddha's answer to this question is one of the most radical things he ever taught, and he gave it in the form of a story. The man's name was Angulimala. The name means garland of fingers. He had earned it in a way that needs to be stated plainly. He was a serial killer. He wore around his neck the fingers of the people he had killed, a physical count of lives taken, visible to anyone who saw him on the road. At the time the Buddha encountered him, according to the texts, he had killed 999 people. Now, how does a person become this? The story preserved in the tradition is important because it speaks to something the Buddha returned to repeatedly: the way that corrupt teaching can redirect an otherwise capable mind in catastrophically wrong directions. Angulimala had been a brilliant student by the account, of a teacher who, known for reasons the texts attribute to professional jealousy, came to want to destroy him. The teacher devised a way to accomplish this. He told Angulimala that the path to liberation required him to collect 1,000 fingers, one from each of 1,000 lives taken, a teaching fabricated entirely from the desire to destroy, delivered with the authority of a teacher to a student who had been trained to trust. This is not a detail that exonerates Angulimala. He killed 999 people. The karma of those killings was his, regardless of the corrupt instruction that sent him down that road. But it is a detail that explains, without excusing. That shows how a mind, even a sincere mind, can be redirected toward catastrophic harm by the combination of misplaced trust and false teaching. By the time the Buddha walked into Angulimala's forest, the killer was known throughout the region. The roads near his territory were empty. The king had dispatched soldiers, families had fled, villages had been abandoned, and Angulimala was one person away from the 1,000 he had been told he needed. When people saw which road the Buddha was taking, they called after him. They ran alongside the chariot, some of them at least, because there are always people who try to save the person heading toward something terrible. "Turn back," they said. "That forest, Angulimala is there. No one goes that way. Turn back." The Buddha walked. There is something in that walking that is itself a teaching. The quality of walking that does not speed up or slow down in the face of danger. And that moves through the world with the same rhythm, whether the road is safe or whether it is the one road in the region that everyone else has learned to avoid. The walking of someone who has found the ground, the actual ground, not the temporary and contingent ground of safety and comfort and the absence of threat, but the ground that does not shift, the ground that holds regardless of what is happening on the surface. Angulimala saw the figure on the road and immediately noticed something strange. The figure was walking calmly, moving at a normal pace, not fleeing, not hurrying, not doing any of the things that people do on that road when they become aware of Angulimala's presence. He started running. He was fast, years of living in a forest, years of pursuit, a body trained by the physical demands of the life he had been living. He ran toward the figure. The figure kept walking. He ran harder. The figure kept walking. He sprinted, and still the figure, not walking at what appeared to be a completely normal pace, remained the same distance ahead. The mathematics of the situation, by any ordinary calculation, should not have worked. A running man should be able to catch a walking man. But the distance held, and Angulimala was running at the full speed of which his body was capable, and the monk was walking as if through a garden on a pleasant morning, and the gap between them did not close. Finally, Angulimala shouted, "Stop, monk, stop walking." And the Buddha stopped, turned, and said with the specific, direct, measured quality that characterizes every word attributed to him in the canon, "I have stopped, Angulimala. It is you who have not stopped." Angulimala froze, not because the words were threatening. They were not. Not because there was any physical force in them, but because they were true in a way that his running body recognized before his thinking mind caught up. He had not stopped, not in the sense the monk meant. He had been running toward 1,000 fingers, toward the liberation he had been falsely promised, toward some conclusion of a path that a corrupt teacher had sent him down. And he had not stopped for a very long time, he said. "What do you mean, monk? You are the one walking. I am the one standing still." The Buddha said, "I have stopped all harm to living beings. I have ceased all harmful action. You have not. That is the difference between us." In the whole long body of the canonical suttas, this is one of the most startling moments, Because what the tradition tells us happened next is, by any ordinary logic of psychology and moral consequence, impossible. Angulimala dropped his weapons. He sat down at the monk's feet, and he asked to be ordained as a monk. And the Buddha ordained him. This act, this specific, concrete, radical act of receiving Angulimala into the Sangha, was itself a teaching that the Buddha knew would be questioned, would be challenged, would disturb people who had lost family members to this man, and who would now find him living among the monks who came to their door for alms. The Buddha knew all of this. He did it anyway, because the karma of the moment required it. What followed is not, as I said before, a comfortable redemption arc. The texts do not soften what happened next. After his ordination, Angulimala went on his daily alms round, the practice of walking through the town with a bowl, accepting whatever food was offered, the basic practice of a bhikkhu. And the people of Savatthi recognized him, and some of them threw things, stones, dirt, whatever was available. He came back to the monastery with blood on his face, his robe torn, his bowl broken. He came to the Buddha. He said, "Look at what has happened." The Buddha looked and said, "Bear it. The fruit of what you created is arriving now, in this form, in this life, from these people, in this way." The alternative was something far worse in a far more difficult context, with far less capacity to meet it. Bear it. It is a gift, even when it does not feel like one. And Angulimala bore it. He bore it with the equanimity that comes not from the absence of feeling, but from the understanding of what feeling actually is. A signal about the nature of experience, not a verdict about the value of existence. Then came the day of the woman in labor, and Angulimala was on his alms round in a part of Savatthi he had not walked before, and he came across a scene of emergency. A woman in the difficulty of a prolonged and dangerous labor, her body working against the delivery, the people around her frightened and unable to help. The word for what Angulimala felt in that moment is the word the Buddha used when he spoke of the response of a mind that has been turned toward the truth. He was moved, actually moved in the body, in the place more fundamental than thought. He went back to the monastery. He said to the Buddha, "What do I do?" The Buddha said, "Go back, sit near her, and say to her, 'Sister, since my noble birth, I have never intentionally harmed a living creature. By this truth, may you and your child be well.'" Angulimala said, "But Lord, I have harmed living creatures, 999 of them. If I say that, it will be a lie." And the Buddha said, "Then say, since my noble birth, since the day you were truly born, not the day of your physical birth, but the day the noble birth began, the day you dropped your weapons and sat at a monk's feet and began to learn what living without harm means, since that day you have not intentionally harmed anything. That is true. Say that truth. Let it do its work." Angulimala went back. He sat near the woman. He said the words, the truth of his specific and particular non-harming since the day his life changed. And something in the air of that room, something in the quality of the truth being spoken by the specific person who was speaking it, did something that we can describe only as the confluence of karma and intention, and the particular power of sakha. Truth stated without deflection or performance, doing what truth sometimes does when it is exactly what the situation requires. The labor resolved, the mother survived, the child was born alive and healthy. Sariputta, the chief disciple, the master of doctrinal understanding, one the Buddha called foremost among those who can communicate the teaching, was asked once about Angulimala's transformation. He said, "The direction of the stream, once changed, goes where the stream now goes, not back to its origin. The past karma is real. Its fruit will arrive. But the direction of what is being generated now has changed. And what is generated now, the karma of a life of genuine practice, of genuine compassion, of genuine effort to be of benefit rather than harm, that too will have its fruit. And the fruit of diligence, of appamada, of the turned life, is liberation." Angulimala attained it, full awakening, arahantship, a complete exhaustion of the defilements that bind consciousness to the wheel of becoming. He died in the end of violence. stones thrown by people who remembered. He died with the smile, the specific nod, witness smile described in the texts, of a man who had found what is actually indestructible, who had gone all the way through the thing that the three divine messengers are pointing toward, understanding that what you really are in your deepest nature cannot be harmed even when the body that carries it can be harmed. The Buddha was asked, where was Angulimala reborn after death? He said, he was not reborn. He was completely and finally free. The instruction that Angulimala's story carries into your life is not, you can do whatever you want and it will all be fine in the end. The instruction is more precise and more useful than that. The instruction is, do not mistake your history for your destiny. Do not let the karma of the past become the ceiling on what is possible in the present. The stream can be turned, not instantly, not without effort, not without the willingness to drop the weapons and sit down, but actually genuinely really turned. The flame can be moved. What weapons have you been carrying? What would it mean to drop them? Chapter 10. King Ashoka saw the messenger too. There are moments in history when the scale of human action makes the teaching of the three divine messengers visible at a scope that individual stories cannot quite reach. Moments when the consequences of pamada or apamada, heedlessness or diligence, are played out not in the life of a single person but across the lives of thousands, of tens of thousands, of hundreds of thousands of people who never chose to become part of a lesson. Kalinga is one of those moments. The year is approximately 260 years before the Common Era. Ashoka in Sanskrit, name meaning without sorrow, a name that would acquire an almost unbearable irony in the light of what he had just done, is at the height of his power. He is the third emperor of the Mauryan dynasty, which his grandfather Chandragupta had built into the most powerful empire the Indian subcontinent had seen. He controls territory stretching from what is now Afghanistan in the west to what is now Bangladesh in the east, from the Himalayan foothills in the north to the Deccan Plateau in the south. He has been emperor for 8 years. He has consolidated his rule, defeated the challenges to his authority, established himself as the kind of ruler who can hold an empire of this scale together. And now there is one significant territory that has not yet been absorbed. Kalinga, along the eastern coast, roughly corresponding to the modern Indian state of Odisha. A prosperous territory, a kingdom with its own culture and its own resistance to incorporation into the expanding Mauryan state. Ashoka sent his armies. What happened in Kalinga was not unusual by the standards of ancient warfare. Ancient warfare, when it reached its conclusion in the form of a total military victory, typically involved killing on a scale that the modern sensibility finds almost impossible to absorb. The accounts vary. The ancient sources give numbers that ancient sources routinely exaggerated, but the historians who have worked most carefully with what we know suggest casualties in the range of 100,000 dead, another 150,000 people displaced, driven from their homes, forced to flee from what had been their ordinary lives, and beyond those numbers, the thousands more who died in the famine and disease that follow military devastation the way shadow follows form. Ashoka won. And then he went to Kalinga, and he stood in what had been a kingdom and was now a field. And what he saw in that field, what arrived in him in the moment of standing in the physical reality of what his victory had cost, that is what the inscriptions he commissioned immediately afterward make unmistakably, irreversibly clear. He did not see the third divine messenger in the form of one corpse on the side of one road. He saw it in the form of what his own choices had made, a field of consequence, 100,000 iterations of the one thing the messengers have always been saying, this is real, this is what death looks like, and you are not exempt from the responsibility of what you have caused. And Rock Edict 13. One of the extraordinary public inscriptions that Ashoka had carved on large rocks throughout his empire, a form of public communication that has no real parallel in the ancient world, a king making his interior life legible to anyone who could read. Rock Edict the 13th is the record of what happened to Ashoka in that field. The inscription says, translating from the Brahmi script that Ashoka's scribes used, a language of the region where each inscription was placed, it says that the beloved of the gods, King Piyadasi, felt remorse. That word, remorse, not regret in the tactical sense, not the calculation of a ruler who has done something that turned out to be more costly than anticipated. Remorse. The specific moral feeling that arises when you understand, in a way that cannot be unfelt, that what you did was wrong, that real people suffered and died because of choices you made, that the power you exercised was exercised at a cost that the people who paid it did not choose to pay on. The inscription says that the beloved of the gods was deeply pained. The language is not diplomatic. It is the language of someone trying to find words for something physical, something that registers in the body. He was pained. The pain was greater because the people who suffered were not enemies, not abstractions, but human beings in their specific human lives, people with parents and children, with faiths and practices, with the ordinary web of relationship and obligation and love that constitutes a human life. He says, in the inscription in stone, not for anyone who passes to read, that there is no conquest that would give him satisfaction comparable to the weight of this, that the only conquest he now desires is what he calls the conquest of Dhamma, the inner victory, a turning of the heart toward what is genuinely right, the practice of non-harming and generosity and compassion, not as policy but as the fundamental orientation of a life. And then he acted on it. He built hospitals. And the texts say he built hospitals for humans throughout his empire. And then, because the logic of his transformation was pushing him toward its natural conclusion, he built hospitals for animals as well. Because the teaching of ahimsa, non-harming, does not stop at the boundary of human beings. He planted trees. Along the roads of his empire, he planted trees for shade, so that travelers, merchants, pilgrims, ordinary people walking from one place to another would have shelter from the sun. He dug wells so that travelers would have water. He built rest houses so that travelers would have places to stop. He sent emissaries, not armies this time. People carrying messages. The message was not territorial demand or political proposition. It was the teaching of Dhamma, the possibility of a life organized around non-harming, generosity, compassion, truthfulness, not self-restraint. He sent this message to Greek kingdoms in the West, to kingdoms in the South, to the edges of the known world as he understood it, not to convert, to offer. The third divine messenger had arrived for Ashoka in a field of consequence, and having received it, he wanted to share the medicine it offered. The Chinese pilgrim Xuanzang, whose given name was Chen Yi, and who traveled the Buddhist world in the early 7th century CE, nearly a millennium after Ashoka's time, and recording in meticulous detail what he found at site after site associated with the history of the Dhamma. Xuanzang arrived at places where Ashoka's presence was still visible. The stupas that Ashoka had built over the relics of the Buddha, the pillars with the inscriptions, the communities that had formed around sites that Ashoka had designated as important. Xuanzang's travel account is one of the most important historical sources we have for understanding what the Buddhist world looked like in the early medieval period. He describes the condition of monasteries, the state of practice, a living transmission of the teaching as he encountered it moving across thousands of miles of difficult terrain, and at site after site connected to Ashoka, he finds the presence of the emperor's transformation still alive 1,000 years later. The wells are still there. The trees have grown and been replaced and grown again. The stories of the king who went to a field and was changed are still being told. The Mahavamsa, the chronicle of Sri Lankan Buddhism composed in the 5th century CE, a text that preserves historical memory of a period several centuries earlier, records that Ashoka gave away so much of the imperial treasury to support the Dhamma and the Sangha and the welfare of ordinary people that his ministers eventually took steps to restrict his access to state funds. They could not stop him entirely. He gave his personal jewelry. He gave items of royal insignia. The rock edicts record that he considered himself not the owner of the kingdom, but its caretaker, a steward of something that belonged to the people who lived in it, not to the person who happened to be ruling it. No. Ashoka's story adds something to the teaching of the three divine messengers that the individual stories of Kisagotami and Angulimala cannot quite reach. It adds scale. It shows that the teaching is not only personal. Messengers do not only speak to individuals in individual moments. They speak to systems, to the ways power is organized and used, to the question of what a ruler or an institution, or a society with resources and authority does with those resources and that authority. The teaching of dana, generosity, was not for Ashoka a private virtue. It was a public policy. The teaching of ahimsa, non-harming, was not a personal spiritual practice. It was the organizing principle of an empire. And the encounter with the third divine messenger in a field of consequence produced not just a changed heart, but a changed world, or at least a changed empire, or at least the attempt to change it, to use the power that the messengers had found him wielding, to build something different from what power usually builds. You are not an emperor. Your sphere of influence is probably smaller than Ashoka's, but you have a sphere. You have relationships, resources, decisions. You have contexts in which you exercise some form of power. Over your own life? None. Over the lives of people who depend on you, over the environments you participate in and shape. What would it look like if the messengers had arrived, if they have arrived, and you, like Ashoka, were standing in the field? And what would the genuine, unsoftened response to that arrival require of the way you use what you have? Ashoka went to Kalinga and was never the same. The wells he dug are still there, somewhere under the centuries of accumulation. The trees have grown and fallen and grown again. The stone is still standing. What will you build with the time the messengers are telling you not to waste? Now, Chapter 11. The rarest thing in all the worlds. We have arrived at the turn in the teaching that no one expects. I want to prepare you for it, because it arrives in a way that can be missed if you are not watching for it. And after everything that has come before, the three questions, the three admissions, the hell realms, the 5 iron stakes, the great fire, after all of that, the Devadūta Sutta does something that is almost unprecedented in the way it changes the register of the entire teaching. King Yama speaks again, not to the person who came before him in Pamada, not to administer more consequence, not to explain or justify or elaborate on what has already been described. Yama speaks. And what he says transforms everything that came before it, the way a single chord change can transform an entire piece of music, revealing what the music was actually about all along. He says, I wish I could be among the human beings. That is the sentence, that is the turn. The judge of the dead, the administrator of consequence, a being who has witnessed more varieties of human suffering and more varieties of human heedlessness than any other figure in the teaching. That being looks out from his position and says, I wish I could be where you are. I wish I could encounter a Tathagata, one who has come to know things as they truly are, a fully enlightened Buddha in the world. I wish I could sit at his feet and hear the teaching directly. I wish I could receive the Dhamma in a human body with a human mind, with the specific combination of suffering and capacity and time that only a human life provides. I wish I could practice the path. King Yama weeps for the chance to be human. Sit with that for a moment, because it is not a small thing. This is the being who has sat across from every person who ever died in the first several centuries of human civilization and asked them, did you see the messengers? Did you let them in? Did you do anything with what you saw? This is the being who has witnessed 10,000 times and more the moment when a human life, specific, particular, unrepeatable, arrives at its reckoning and the accounting is done and the cost of Pamada becomes fully, finally, irrefutably clear. And what this being wants, more than anything available to him in his position, is to be back on the other side of that conversation and to be the one standing before the teacher rather than the one asking the questions. To have what every human being has, the chance to hear the teaching while there is still time to do something with it. This is the most compressed and most devastating statement about the value of the human birth that exists in the entire Buddhist canon. Why is human existence so specifically, so irreplaceably valuable? And this requires a brief excursion into the Buddhist understanding of the cosmological landscape. Not to ask you to believe any particular metaphysical claim, but to understand the logic of the teaching. In the Buddhist framework, consciousness can inhabit many different realms of existence, not just the human realm. Above the human realm are the Deva realms, realms of beings whose experience is characterized by pleasure, ease, beauty, the absence of the grinding suffering that characterizes so much of human life. Beings in these realms live for what the Buddhist texts describe as vast stretches of time, thousands of human years, in some accounts, millions, in states of such sustained pleasure that the ordinary motivations that drive spiritual practice are simply not available to them. Why would you practice letting go of attachment when everything you could want is already present? Why would you develop urgency about the nature of impermanence when the good things in your life seem to last forever? And why would you let the divine messengers do their work when the messengers barely arrive? And when they do, the cushion of surrounding pleasure makes it possible to absorb them without genuine disruption. The Deva realms are, this teaching, a very long, very comfortable, very pleasant trap. Below the human realm, on the other hand, are the realms of existence characterized by suffering, the hell realms, the realm of hungry ghosts, the animal realm. Beings in these states are in too much pain, too much confusion, too much driven by immediate survival to have the spaciousness that genuine practice requires. A being in the hell realms is not able to sit quietly and contemplate the nature of impermanence. A being in the grip of uncontrollable hunger and thirst, the hungry ghost realm, a state of consciousness dominated by craving that can never be satisfied, is not able to make the subtle interior turn that the teaching requires. A being operating primarily from the drives of animal survival does not have access to the particular combination of self-reflection and moral reasoning that makes the human path possible. And the human realm sits at the precise intersection of these two poles. Enough suffering to make the messengers unmistakable, but not so much that no other experience is possible. Enough pleasure to make life worth living and love worth risking, but not so much that the urgency of the path is anesthetized away. Enough intelligence to understand the teaching, enough emotional depth to be moved by it, enough moral capacity to act on it, and enough time in the lifespan of a human being to actually complete significant portions of the work. This specific configuration the Buddha taught is extraordinarily rare across the vast range of possible forms of consciousness. And its rarity is not just a cosmological fact. It is an urgent practical consideration for every human being alive right now. You have this configuration right now, in this body, with this mind, in this life. Yama weeps for it, not because he is miserable in his position. The texts do not describe him as suffering, but because he knows what the human configuration makes possible. And he watches, lifetime after lifetime, the people who have it use it for something less than what it is. There is a practice that the Buddha taught specifically in relation to this understanding. The Pali name is Marangasati, mindfulness of death, the deliberate, sustained, regular practice of contemplating the certainty of one's own death, not as a morbid exercise or an attempt to generate existential anxiety, but as a way of staying in contact with what is actually true about the situation, thereby maintaining the quality of attention and urgency that makes practice real rather than performative. The Buddha described several monks who practiced Marangasati in different ways and evaluated their practice. One monk said, "May I live until evening. I want to have time to reflect on the teaching." The Buddha said, this monk's mindfulness of death is slack. He is relating to death as something that will arrive in the distant future and can be held there at a safe distance from the present moment. Another monk said, May I live until I have finished this meal. I want to attend to the teaching for at least that long. Better, the Buddha said, but still too slack. The monk whose Maranasati the Buddha praised was the one who said, "May I live through the span of one in-breath and one out-breath so that I can attend to the teaching in this moment," who lived with the understanding, felt understanding, not just intellectual knowledge, that between this breath in and this breath out, the departure could come, that the window could close, not probably, not likely, but possibly. And that possibility, held genuinely rather than at arm's length, makes every breath a gift rather than a given, makes every moment of practice something precious rather than something to be postponed. This is what Maranasati does when it is practiced correctly, not produce anxiety. Anxiety is about an imagined future, a catastrophe that hasn't happened yet. Maranasati produces presence. And because the person who is genuinely aware that the next breath might be the last one is not anywhere other than here, is not planning or regretting or managing impressions or trying to get somewhere, is simply here, attending, not present in the only moment that has ever been available. There is a story that lives beneath all the other stories in the Buddhist tradition, older than any of the historical figures we have met in our journey, so old that it exists in the realm of what the tradition calls incalculable time. Time measured not in years or centuries, but in the vast cosmic units that the ancient Indian cosmological imagination used for what it understood to be the actual scale of conditioned existence. And a being named Sumedha. Sumedha was, in this story, a renunciant of great power, not a monk in the Buddhist sense, since the Buddhist teaching had not yet arisen, but a practitioner in the broader tradition of the Indian spiritual world, a person who had devoted many lifetimes to the development of extraordinary qualities of mind and heart. He was living as a hermit in the Himalayan range, far from ordinary human society, in the conditions of silence and simplicity that his practice required. One day, word came to him that a Buddha was going to pass through the area, not the historical Gautama Buddha. This is a time so far before the historical Buddha that it is measured in the cosmic units I mentioned. A Buddha named Dipamkara, the lamp bearer, the one who bears the flame. One of the series of Buddhas who in the Buddhist cosmology appear at intervals across the vast span of time, each one arising to teach the Dhamma in an age when the Dhamma has been forgotten, each one lighting the lamp again. The people of the area were preparing the road for Dipamkara's passage. Sumedha offered to help. He was given a section of road to level and prepare, but the work took longer than expected, and Dipamkara arrived before Sumedha's section was ready. The road was muddy, unprepared. Sumedha did the only thing he could think of to prepare it. He lay down in the mud, face down, body spread, his long ascetic's hair loosened and spread like a mat, so that the Buddha could walk on him rather than through the mud, so that the passage of the awakened one would not be impeded. And in that moment, lying in the mud, everything surrendered, nothing held back. Something arose in Sumedha, a recognition. A vow, not the vow of someone who wants to be respected or famous or to accumulate spiritual merit. The vow that arises when a being comes into contact with awakening and understands at the most fundamental level what it is and what it makes possible. The vow to attain it. Not for oneself alone, that would be insufficient. It would be too small for what the moment was asking. The vow to attain the complete and perfect awakening that can light the lamp for all beings. To become a Buddha, a Sammasambuddha. The tradition counts the time between that vow and the moment Siddhartha Gautama attained enlightenment under the Bodhi tree as 4 Asankhya Kalpas, 4 incalculable eons. Time beyond ordinary comprehension, lifetime after lifetime, in the human realm and in other realms, practicing the 10 paramis, the 10 perfections of character that a bodhisattva must develop to completion. Generosity, virtue, renunciation, wisdom, energy, patience, truthfulness, determination, loving kindness, equanimity. Developing them to degrees of completeness that require the full range of possible human circumstances to develop, requiring wealth and poverty, health and sickness, And power and powerlessness, love and loss, the whole spectrum of human experience, each one an opportunity to deepen one of the perfections. And across all of those lifetimes, human birth after human birth was the vehicle. Each one precious beyond ordinary valuation. Each one an opportunity that the being now known as Sumedha, and later known as Gautama, and finally known as the Buddha, did not take for granted. Human birth after human birth, and in each one the messengers arriving. Old age, sickness, death, not as obstacles to the path, but as the teachers of the path, the beings who made the urgency real. Who kept the practice from becoming comfortable or performative or stuck in the pleasant self-satisfaction of someone who is doing the spiritual work without quite letting the spiritual work do its work on them. Yama knows all of this, has witnessed all of this, has watched the rare vehicle of the human birth arrive, lifetime after lifetime, in the hands of beings who, through no malice, through no particular failure of character, through the simple and almost universal human tendency toward pamada, used it for something less than it was, and he weeps. Not from despair, from the specific, precise grief of knowing what is possible and watching it be missed. You are holding what Yama weeps for right now, in this body, in this breath, in this moment that has not yet run out. What will you do with it? Chapter 12, what it means to actually wake up. We are near the end, not of the journey. The journey doesn't end here. It has barely begun. The journey is the rest of your life, but of this particular telling, this particular arc of story and teaching and human testimony that has carried us from a palace gate at dawn through a courtroom in the realm of the dead and back to the world. Before I say what I want to say in this chapter, I need to name something about the experience of this journey itself, not about the content of the teaching, but about what it does to you to travel through it. If you have been genuinely present for what has come before, if you have allowed the three sights to actually be three sights, and if you have stood in Yama's court and heard the questions not as things asked of a fictional character, but as questions being asked of you, if you have felt something shift in the hell realms and then breathe again in the presence of Kisagotami, and felt something break open in the moment Angulimala dropped his weapons, and felt the specific quality of Yama's longing, if you have been present for all of that, something has happened to you. Not a conversion, not a transformation in the dramatic before and after sense that the word usually implies. Something subtler and more lasting than that. A slight shift in the quality of attention. A hairline fracture in the wall of comfortable distance that most of us maintain between ourselves and what is actually true about our situation. No, a small but real change in what you notice when you look at the person across from you, or the body you are living in, or the morning light coming through the window. This is the work of the divine messengers, properly received. Now, we come to the master question I planted at the very beginning of our journey. The question I said the Buddha had in mind. The question that every human being will eventually face, that cannot be avoided, that will be asked not by any person but by the nature of conditioned existence itself. The question that only one answer can answer, and the answer is already being written right now in the choices of your daily life. You know what the question is now. You have traveled far enough to see it. The question is the three messengers themselves, not a question asked in words, a question asked in the form of what happens to every human body, without exception, over the course of every human life, without exception. The question asked by the gray hair and the shaking hand and the rattle of labored breathing and the absolute stillness of the body after life has left it. Did you see this? Did you let it in? Did you do anything with it? That is the question Yama asks. That is the question the messengers are always asking. That is the question your body is asking you right now. The only language a body can use. The language of its own inevitable process. The night the Buddha died, and I want to dwell here because this moment contains everything. The night the Buddha died, a grove of sal trees outside the town of Kushinagar, Ananda went to a room alone and stood against a wall and wept. Ananda, who had memorized every word the Buddha had ever spoken in his presence. Ananda, who had been the first person the Buddha asked for when he needed someone, the person the tradition calls the guardian and keeper of the teaching. Ananda, and who had for 25 years organized his entire life around the person of the Buddha, his physical care, his schedule, the management of the people who came to see him, the filtering of those who should and those who should not approach. Ananda stood in a room alone and let himself feel what he felt, because the man he had loved for 25 years was dying, was in the next grove over, lying between the sal trees in the last hours of a life that had given everything it had, and Ananda could not stop it, and Ananda, for all those years and all that proximity, not yet crossed the threshold into the full liberation that the practice points toward. This is the detail the texts preserve that I find most human and most true. And 25 years at the side of the most fully awakened being the tradition acknowledges. 25 years of hearing every word, every teaching, every exchange between the Buddha and the full range of human beings who came to him with their questions and their grief and their earnest and their confusion. Not 25 years of being so close to the source of the Dhamma that you could have reached out and touched it at any moment. And not yet done. Not because Ananda was failing, not because he was deficient in intelligence or devotion or effort, but because proximity is not the same as contact, because hearing is not the same as receiving, and because being close to something true and allowing that truth to actually reorganize your life from the inside. Those are different operations, and the second one cannot be done by anyone other than yourself, regardless of how much help and how favorable the conditions are. The Buddha sent for him. He said, "Ananda, come, enough, do not weep." And Ananda came, and the Buddha looked at him, the specific, direct, unaverating look that had characterized the Buddha's looking his entire teaching life, the same quality of seeing that had distinguished Siddhartha on the road outside the palace 60 years before, and said, "Ananda, all conditioned things are impermanent. Work out your salvation with diligence. Sabba sankankara anika, apamadana sampadatha." These were the last words the Buddha spoke in his teaching life, not a summary of the doctrine, not a complex philosophical statement, not even a specific instruction about practice. The most fundamental thing he had ever said, stripped to its irreducible core: everything conditioned is impermanent, and work out your salvation with diligence. The first statement is the diagnosis. The second is the prescription. Between them is everything the three divine messengers have been trying to say from the beginning. And the Buddha lay down between the sal trees on his right side and passed into the final nibbana. And the trees bloomed out of season, the tradition says, bloomed and shed their blossoms over his body. Nature, unable to contain itself in the presence of what it was witnessing, and the night became completely silent. And Ananda stood in a room alone and wept, and something happened in that grief that could not have happened in any other way. Because grief, when it is genuinely felt rather than managed, and when it is allowed to be exactly as large as it actually is rather than contained within the socially appropriate and psychologically comfortable dimensions, grief does something to the self that was doing the grieving. It breaks something open. It removes temporarily and sometimes permanently the ordinary structures of self-management and self-protection that keep certain truths at bay. The third divine messenger had arrived for the Buddha, the specific, witnessed, undeniable departure of the person who had been the living embodiment of everything the teaching pointed toward. And Ananda, who had seen the first and second and third messengers 1,000 times in 25 years of teaching alongside the Buddha, finally, in this specific moment, in this specific grief, let the third messenger in all the way. And sometime before dawn, the texts say simply that it was before the first Buddhist council convened, which was the following day, Ananda attained arahantship, full, complete, final awakening. The liberation that had been available to him for 25 years, hovering just on the other side of the glass wall of proximity, without full contact, arrived. In the dark, in the grief. On the night that the teacher died, the message of the third messenger finally received all the way through. Mahapayapati Gautami. We have met her only in passing so far, but she deserves her full moment here, because her story is the teaching of the messengers applied to the longest possible arc, a lifetime of proximity to something extraordinary, and then the final heeding. She was the Buddha's aunt, and his mother Maya died 7 days after his birth, as the tradition says she did, the accounts of her death varying but agreeing on the fact of it. It was Mahapajapati who took the infant, who nursed him, and who raised him alongside her own children, who was in the functional and practical sense his mother through the years of his childhood and into the strange and quiet years of his early manhood in the palace, before the foresights changed everything. She watched the child she had raised renounce the household life and walk out of the palace gates at night, watched him wander for 6 years, and then word came back as word of the Buddha's enlightenment and the beginning of his teaching spread outward from Bodh Gaya. She heard what he had become. She became a lay follower, then she wanted more. She wanted the training itself, the full path, a complete practice. She wanted to go all the way. The tradition records that she came to the Buddha 3 times and asked to be ordained into the monastic community, to become a bhikkhuni, a fully ordained nun. 3 times he was silent, which the tradition interprets as refusal. 3 times she went away and came back and asked again. Ananda intervened. He asked the Buddha directly, "Lord, is a woman capable, in principle, of attaining the stages of awakening, of becoming a stream enterer, a once-returner, a non-returner, an arahant?" "Yes, Ananda, a woman is capable of all of these," Ananda said. "And why?" And the Buddha gave the permission, with conditions which have been debated and discussed across the centuries since, conditions whose meaning and applicability remain a subject of conversation in the Buddhist world today. But he gave the permission. The bhikkhuni order was established. Mahapayapati Gautami became its first member, and the woman who had held the infant Siddhartha, who had fed him and comforted him, and watched him grow into the prince he became before he walked away to become something the world had never seen, took the robes, became a student of her own student, began the practice, and attained it. The tradition records her as an arahant, one of the great awakened women of the early Sangha, whose name heads the list in the Therigatha, the verses of the elder nuns, of those who found the way. Her ordination was itself an act of heeding the messengers, a recognition arrived at after a lifetime of proximity. That proximity was not sufficient, that watching someone else practice was not practice, that the time was now, whatever her age, whatever her situation, whatever the social obstacles that a woman of her time and place faced in entering the formal monastic life. Now, not after the conditions improved, not when things were less complicated now. The messengers had been arriving for Mahapati Gautami throughout her long life, in the death of her sister, in the aging of her body, in the departure of the child she had raised, the years that passed while she was a lay follower, good and faithful and genuinely committed, but not yet fully turned in the way that turning required. And then she turned. What does it look like to actually wake up? Not in the final, complete sense that the arahants describe. The exhaustion of all defilements, the end of all becoming, the permanent establishment in the ground that is not subject to the vicissitudes of conditioned existence, but in the ordinary, available, relevant to your life right now sense. It looks like Kissa Gautami at the end of the day's walking, putting down what she had been carrying, not abandoning the love that had made her carry it, not forgetting the specific and irreplaceable child she had loved, but putting down the refusal, the insistence that reality be different from what it is, the carrying of something that had become impossible to carry forever, and picking up instead the practice, The quiet, specific daily work of attending to what is actually here. It looks like Angulimala on the road, sprinting and not gaining ground, and finally stopping. Not because the external situation changed, because something internal collapsed. The exhaustion of having run from something for so long that the body simply cannot run anymore. And in that stopping, in that collapse, the possibility of something completely different. It looks like Ashoka in the field, looking at what he had caused without looking away, and without finding a way to justify it or explain it or transform it into something more comfortable. Just looking, and from that looking, not from guilt, which tends to circle and repeat and produce nothing useful, but from clarity, making different choices, one after another, well after well, tree after tree, hospital after hospital. It looks like Ananda in the dark after the teacher died, after the grief had done its work. Finding the ground that had been there all along beneath the grief and beneath the proximity and beneath the 25 years of service that had been so devoted and so complete, and somehow, until this moment, not quite enough, looks like you. In whatever the specific texture of your life is, in whatever forms the messengers have been arriving, the specific ways that old age and sickness and death have been making themselves known to you, in the bodies of the people you love, in the mirror on certain mornings, in the phone calls you have received or will receive, in the quiet moments when the ordinary noise of your life thins enough for what is true to be heard, choosing to look, without the glass wall, without the management, without the refusal, and then choosing what to do next, not dramatically, not with a grand gesture, not necessarily with any visible change at all in the first moment, but choosing in the quality of attention you bring to this hour, in the orientation of your heart in this conversation, in what you put down and what you pick up, and what you finally decide is worth the time that will not come back. Choosing to live as someone who has heeded the messengers. That is what it looks like to wake up. Chapter 13. The three messengers are here right now. We have come very far together, farther perhaps than either of us quite realized when the chariot began to move through the palace gate in the first minutes of our journey. And we traveled with Siddhartha through 3 sights that broke his world open and remade it into something truer. We sat in the grove at Jetavana as the Buddha gathered the monks and gave the teaching that would become the Devadūta Sutta. We stood in Yama's court and heard the 3 questions asked, and heard the 3 admissions made, and heard the declaration that no one else made, this, that you are the author. We descended into the fire of the hell realms and came back scorched but not destroyed, carrying what we found there. We walked with Kisagotami through a city of doors and found, in the aggregate of all those doors, something more necessary than the mustard seed she was looking for. We stood on a road in a forest and watched a man sprint toward a monk who kept walking at the same pace and never gained any ground. We stood in a field in Kalinga and watched a powerful man look at what his power had made. We heard Yama, the judge of the dead, weep for the chance to be in the position you are in right now. We sat in the dark with Ananda after everything and watched him finally arrive at what had been there all along. And now we are here, in this moment, together. The first thing I want to say, before we come to the 3 things, the 3 things the Buddha would want you to carry out of this teaching into the rest of your life, is something about right now, in this moment, and as you listen to these words and let them find whatever place they find in you, the 3 divine messengers are present, not coming, not on their way, present, already here, already speaking in the language they have always used, a language that does not require words because it is written in the texture of your body and the texture of the bodies you love and the texture of the world as it actually is. Jara, old age, is here. In the mirror this morning, if you looked without looking away, in the body of the parent or the grandparent or the teacher or the old friend who moves differently than they moved 10 years ago, who requires different things, who has a different relationship with time and energy and what is possible. In your own body, in the ways it is changed from the body you had at 20, Ways you can feel even when you cannot quite see them. Not ways that are subtle now, but are the early chapters of a story that has a known ending. Jara is here. It has been here all along. Biadi, sickness, is here. Not necessarily in your life right now in its acute and obvious forms. None. But in the knowledge, the unavoidable, if you are honest with your self-knowledge, that the body you are living in can fail without warning. Has failed before in small ways, will fail again in larger ways, because that is the nature of biological systems in a physical world that is always working against the maintenance of their extraordinary complexity. The phone call that arrives and changes everything can arrive at any time. A result that comes back from a test can come back different from what you were expecting. Biadi is not absent from your life because it is not currently happening. It is present in the nature of the body you are inhabiting. It has always been present there. Maranga, death, arrived somewhere today. In this world, in this city or this country or somewhere on this rotating stone, a person died this morning who was alive yesterday. Several people, not thousands of people. And one of them, one of the thousands who died today, had the same relationship to their expected future that you have to yours. Got up this morning thinking about the day, had plans, had people they were going to call, had something they were going to do next week. And then the third messenger arrived, as it arrives, without scheduling in advance. The messengers are not coming. They are already here. They have been here every day of your life, knocking, as the Buddha described, quietly and then less quietly and then in whatever form is required to get through to a mind that has been trained by the ordinary forces of human civilization to keep them at a comfortable distance. You know this. In the part of you that does not lie to itself, you know this. Now, the three things. The first thing the Buddha would say to you, standing here at the end of this journey, if he were able to speak in the plainest possible language with no concern for whether what he said was comfortable, heedlessness is the danger, not death. Death is not the problem. Death is a fact. The problem, the thing that generates the suffering the Devadūta Sutta describes with such unsparing vividness, is not death but pamada, the sustained, habitual, normalized orientation of attention away from what is actually true. The accumulated practice of looking away, the trained capacity for dividing life into what is important, the urgent, the immediate, the socially legible, and what matters, the deep, the final, the things that will be what you are actually doing with your life when the accounting is done. The path between these two, between pamada and apamada, is not long. It does not require travel to a remote location or years of preparation or a particular set of favorable circumstances. It requires one thing, the willingness to look right now at what is actually here, not at an edited version of what is here, cleaned up and reframed so that nothing difficult is allowed to disturb the basic story you are telling yourself about how things are, at what is actually here. The body that is aging, the vulnerability that is real, the time that is finite, the love that matters in a way that requires being acted on, not held in reserve for the more convenient future. Apamada is available to you in this moment, not as a permanent achievement, as a choice, made now, and then made again and again, in the ordinary moments that are the only material out of which a life is actually made. The second thing, karma is not punishment, and it is authorship. You are writing your life right now. This is not a metaphor. It is the most literal statement that can be made about the nature of intentional existence. The intentions you are generating in this moment, what you are actually trying to do, beneath the surface of what you appear to do, in the place that no one sees but you. Those intentions are producing consequence, real consequence. The consequence that arrives in the shape of the mind you are building, the relationships you are creating or neglecting, the character that is being formed in the laboratory of your daily choices. Yama does not create the karma he witnesses. He reads it back. He shows the person before him the account of their own authorship, the story they wrote with the choices of their inner life, and he asks them to acknowledge that they wrote it. The account that you are writing right now, not the public account, not the version of yourself that exists for the people who can observe your external behavior. The interior account, the one written in the quality of your attention and the orientation of your heart and the choices you make in the moments when nothing external is requiring anything of you. That account is the one that matters. You are writing it right now with this moment. And the next, and the next. The question is not whether you will write it. You are already writing it. The question is what the next line will be, the third thing. And this is the thing I want you to carry most carefully, because it is the one most easily forgotten in the ordinary press of daily life. The one that Yama's tears were specifically about. The third thing is this: the life you have right now is the rarest thing in any of the worlds, not the good life. Not the comfortable life, not the life free of suffering or loss or the 10,000 ordinary difficulties that human beings navigate every day. The human life, this specific configuration, enough suffering to make the messengers audible, enough intelligence to understand what they are saying, enough moral capacity to do something about it, enough time to actually complete significant portions of the work. This specific configuration is the understanding of the teaching we have been following, extraordinarily rare across the vast range of possible forms of consciousness. Yama weeps for it, the judge of the dead, the administrator of consequence, the being who has witnessed more human lives than can be counted, weeps for the chance to be where you are. Think about that, not abstractly, specifically, the being who has the longest and most comprehensive view of what the human birth makes possible and what happens when it is not used for what it makes possible. That being from the fullness of that view, not from the complete picture that no human being living in the middle of their life can possibly have. That being looks at your situation and feels longing, not because your life is easy, not because the circumstances are favorable, not because you have been spared suffering, but because you have the configuration, you have the vehicle, the precious human birth that Yama cannot have and that the Bodhisattva Sumedha sought across 4 incalculable eons, and that is available to you right now, in this breath, in this moment, a body that breathes, a mind that can reflect, a heart that can turn. The Buddha said in the final words of his teaching life, all conditioned things are impermanent. Work out your salvation with diligence. He said it to Ananda, not he was saying it to all of us. Not later, not when the circumstances are better or the time is less busy or the path is clearer. Now, in the ordinary, specific, impermanent, precious, temporary, irreplaceable now of your actual life, the messengers have arrived. The first, the second, the third. They are here. They have been here all along. They have been knocking in their patient and faithful way for your entire life. Devadūta Sutta ends with a verse, the Buddha's summary, his final compression of everything the teaching has been saying into the smallest possible form. He says, Apamato ubhoata adiganghati pangdito, and the diligent person grasps both kinds of welfare, the welfare of this life and the welfare beyond it. The person who is genuinely present, genuinely awake, genuinely in contact with what is real, that person finds both, not because they abandoned the world, not because they escaped into some realm of pure spirituality that has no contact with the ordinary texture of human life, but because they brought the quality of full attention to the ordinary texture of human life and found inside it what it actually contains. And pamatuyoka dabiko atohoti na tadiso. And the heedless person, the one who has maintained the comfortable distance, who has let the messengers arrive and deflected them, who has spent their life in the sophisticated, well-practiced, entirely understandable management of what is difficult about being human. That person misses both, not just the spiritual welfare, both because the quality of a human life, the actual experience of being alive, not the depth and richness and presence of it, is not available at a safe distance from what is true. The heedless life is a smaller life, not in external terms, not measurable in wealth or achievement or social standing. On, smaller in the interior, less present, less alive, less itself, and the diligent life, the life of appamada, of genuine contact with what is real, of having let the messengers in and having allowed what they carry to change something. That life is fuller, more itself, more present, more real. Not because the circumstances are different, because the attention is different, and because the person living it has done the simple and almost impossibly difficult thing of being actually here. The three divine messengers are standing in front of you right now. They are standing as they have always stood, the ordinary forms of ordinary life. In the gray at the temples, in the fragility of the body that you forget about when it is working well, the knowledge that sits beneath every day you live that this specific and particular and utterly irreplaceable life is finite. They are not asking you to despair. They are not asking you to withdraw from the world or cease to love the people you love or abandon the ordinary goods of ordinary life. They are asking you one thing, the one thing they have always been asking, the one thing they will keep asking until the account is closed. Did you see us? Did you let us in? Did you do anything with what we showed you? The answer is being written right now, in the quality of this breath, in what you choose to attend to in the next hour, in the small, invisible, entirely consequential choices of your inner life. Appamadana sampadetha. Work out your salvation with diligence. The messengers have arrived. The window is open. This is your moment. Wake up.